Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. I'm really glad you made it here tonight. Wherever you are in the world, tucked in bed, resting after a long day, or simply searching for a quiet corner, this little space is for you, a place where calm and curiosity can meet, side by side. Tonight, we're traveling to the edge of humanity's own fragile beginning, a moment when the Earth itself became the keeper of our survival. Humanity is a young species, appearing only around 300,000 years ago, a brief flicker in the long memory of the planet. The world we stepped into was restless and shifting, shaped by cycles that could darken skies, silence forests, and erase entire lineages without warning. Scientists believe that early humans faced pressures so immense that our population shrank to the size of a small town, perhaps fewer than 10,000 individuals scattered across uncertain landscapes. Evidence suggests these narrow moments left marks in our DNA, quiet reminders of a time when survival depended on chance as much as adaptation. Volcanic winters dimmed the sun into muted twilight. Mega droughts stretched across continents. Sudden freezes gripped regions that once held warmth. Each shift remade the planet faster than early humans could understand, reshaping seas, extinguishing familiar paths, and testing the boundaries of existence. Even long before humans arrived, Earth experienced upheavals that prepared the ground we would one day walk upon. Oceans rose and fell, magnetic fields wavered, invisible gases seeped from deep chambers beneath the crust, altering the air itself. These ancient events carved the narrow corridor our species would eventually depend on, guiding the delicate balance we call home. And as humans finally emerged, fragile and few, the planet continued to move beneath our feet. Storms of unimaginable scale swept through early settlements. Climates shifted within decades. Ecosystems faltered, leaving communities to navigate worlds that could change faster than knowledge could spread. But why did humanity survive when so many other lineages vanished? What forces shaped the razor thin path that led from those few survivors to all of us alive today? How close did we come to slipping into silence before our story even began? And what does it mean to live on a planet capable of reshaping our fate without warning? Tonight, we continue by tracing the moments when Earth held our future in its hands. But before we begin, if you're already feeling the calm, it would mean so much if you gave this video a like, maybe even subscribed, if you'd like more soft science journeys like this one. And if you'd be kind enough, let me know in the comments where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there. I always love to see how far these quiet ripples reach across the world. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together let us drift gently into the improbable story of our survival. In the quiet hours of Earth's long history, life has always balanced on narrow ledges. Even the strongest creatures have lived under forces that could sweep them away with barely a trace. Extinction pressure is the name scientists give to the invisible weight that leans upon every species, the constant push that tests whether a lineage can endure whatever the planet places in its path. It is not a single danger, but a collection of shifting obstacles that tighten and loosen over time, shaping the rise and fall of life in rhythms older than memory. For early humans, this pressure was never far away. The world they walked through was still settling from ancient upheavals, still cooling from long seasons of darkness, still rearranging its forests and plains as ice crept and receded. Each change arrived like a quiet knock at the door, small at first, then heavier, until entire landscapes began to bend beneath it. A species survives by finding footholds in these changing conditions, and when those footholds shrink, the path forward narrows with them. Small populations feel this pressure most intensely. When a species is spread thin across a vast world, every loss matters. Every drought, Every cold year, every missing harvest carries more weight than it would for a species with many safe havens. With fewer individuals, the tapestry of life begins to fray at the edges. There are fewer chances for traits that help survival to appear, fewer guardians of knowledge, fewer young to grow into the next chapter of a story already worn thin. Scientists describe this vulnerability through a gentle comparison. A large population is like a forest filled with thousands of seeds. Some may be carried away by storms, some may wither, but enough remain to keep the forest alive. A small population is more like a handful of seeds held in open palms. A single strong wind can scatter them beyond recovery. For early humans, this was not simply a possibility, it was a recurring reality. Each shift in climate or food supply pressed against communities already stretched across the edges of survival. Intelligence, for all its power, offered little protection from the planet's deeper rhythms. Minds can learn, tools can sharpen, stories can spread, but none of these can stop a sky dimmed by distant ash or a season that refuses to warm. Intelligence gives a species the ability to anticipate, to plan, to reflect, yet planning cannot mend a river that has run dry, and reflection cannot warm a valley locked in sudden cold. Early humans used their minds to navigate uncertainty, but they lived within boundaries shaped by forces much larger than thought alone. Their brilliance was a spark in a world governed by tides of climate, geology, and chance. Among the many pressures that shaped those early chapters, three rose again and again as quiet architects of hardship. Climate was the first. Temperatures rose and fell in long waves, sometimes shifting so quickly that familiar environments transformed within a single lifetime. Forests thinned, grasslands moved, rain patterns drifted in new directions. Each change asked new questions of the body and mind, and only those who adapted or wandered found safer ground. Scarcity followed closely behind. When landscapes changed, food and water shifted with them. Lakes shrank, herds moved into distant valleys. Plants that once fed entire groups faded from their seasons. Scarcity does not arrive with a roar. It appears slowly, in smaller harvests, in longer journeys, in the quiet spaces where abundance once lived. For a species living near the threshold of survival, scarcity became one of the most powerful and persistent pressures. Disease formed the third pillar of danger. Even small communities were not sheltered from illness. Parasites, infections, and unknown fevers traveled through camps with painful efficiency. In groups already weakened by hunger or cold, sickness could tip the balance. With fewer individuals to care for the ill or pass on knowledge, disease became both a physical and cultural threat, shaping who survived and how stories continued. In the present, scientists read these ancient struggles not through written records, but through patterns hidden within our DNA. Population genetics allows researchers to trace the footprints left by moments when humanity nearly thinned beyond recovery. These traces appear as narrow passages in the branching paths of our ancestry, places where diversity shrank and then slowly expanded again. It is as if the genome carries soft echoes of each trial, faint reminders of times when only a few carried the future in their hands. These signals do not tell us the names or faces of those survivors. They do not reveal their fears or hopes, nor the exact paths they walked. Instead, they offer something quieter and perhaps more profound. They show that our species did not begin as a vast and confident presence on Earth. It began as a fragile collection of small groups, each one carrying a spark that could have been easily extinguished. The journey that followed was shaped by chance, resilience, and the shifting generosity of the planet itself. In this space between past and present, the foundation becomes clear. A species is easiest to erase when it is small, when the world around it changes faster than it can learn, and when the pressures of climate, Scarcity and disease converge. Early humans walked through this narrow corridor with footsteps light enough to survive, yet close enough to the edge that we still feel the echoes of that journey within us. There are moments in Earth's long story when life narrows into thin passages. These passages are not always written in stone or soil. Sometimes they are held quietly within living bodies, tucked into the spirals of DNA that carry memories older than language. When scientists study the patterns hidden in those spirals, they find places where the human lineage nearly flickered out. These places are known as bottlenecks, periods when our ancestors became so few that the future of our species rested on a number small enough to count with careful hands. The traces of this ancient thinning do not come from fossils or tools. They come from the quiet mathematics of inheritance. When a population becomes small, the variety of genetic patterns shrinks with it. Generations later, that shrinking appears as a narrow band in the long river of ancestry, a place where many paths converge into only a few. For humans, this band is unmistakable. It tells us that far back in prehistory, our numbers may have fallen to fewer than 10,000 individuals. Some studies suggest the number might have dipped even lower, perhaps beneath 5,000, scattered across distant pockets of land that offered the bare minimum needed to stay alive. To picture that world, imagine early humans not as a widespread species, but as a handful of small groups living on the edge of a changing planet. The climate that had once supported rivers, grasslands, and forests was shifting its rhythm. Temperatures wavered in long, uneven sweeps. Rains retreated from places that had once been lush. Winds pushed sands across paths that had guided generations before. Landscapes that once felt familiar began to fade into uncertainty. Climate collapse does not happen with a single moment of drama. It can begin with seasons that arrive a little late, then years that cool or warm in unexpected ways. Vegetation changes shape, animals migrate differently. Rivers that once ran strong begin to braid themselves into thinner flows. For early humans, these shifts carried a simple truth. As the world turned unpredictable, survival demanded movement, adaptation, and a resilience that could stretch across many lifetimes. Mega droughts followed in the wake of these larger climate changes. Not just dry seasons, but long ages of reduced rain that reshaped entire continents. Lakes shrank into quiet basins, marshes dried into plains of cracked earth. Regions that had supported life for thousands of years became harder to inhabit. Water, which had always been the quiet anchor of human settlement, became scarce. Groups that once lived within reach of rich resources were pushed into smaller territories where the land could no longer provide as it once had. Ecosystems, delicate in their balance, feel these changes quickly. Plants that depend on steady moisture begin to fail. Animals that feed on those plants wander elsewhere or decline. Each step downward in the chain ripples into another. For humans living near the threshold of survival, even small disruptions could limit the food available for entire seasons. In a world already reshaped by shifting climate, these disruptions became the quiet architects of hardship. As water and food grew scarce, early communities became more isolated. Travel across difficult landscapes became riskier. The ability to share knowledge and resources across groups dimmed. Fewer children survived to adulthood. Fewer elders lived long enough to guide younger generations. Over time, these pressures pressed us toward that narrow genetic corridor that scientists can still trace today. Yet the story is not one of sudden collapse. It is one of endurance stretched to its absolute limit. The people who lived through this bottleneck were not thriving. They were holding on in environments that tested every skill they possessed. Each small group carried different fragments of memory, different tools, different ways of reading the land. Some lived near shrinking water sources, others followed herds along routes that changed with the climate. A few found pockets of stability where rain still fell or where coastal winds brought moisture to the land. These scattered havens became the quiet stages on which humanity's future played out. In each place, only a small number of individuals carried the lineage forward. The genetic signatures of those survivors merged as humans expanded again in later ages, creating the shared ancestry that all people carry today. It is humbling to think that the entire global population, now spread across mountains, deserts, cities, and coastlines, can be traced back to groups so small that they could have vanished with a single bad season. This prehistoric bottleneck stands as the closest we ever came to disappearing entirely. It was not marked by a single disaster, but by the slow tightening of the world around us. Climate, drought, and ecological change pressed inward from all sides, leaving humanity balanced on a thread so thin that it could have snapped with little effort. Yet it did not. The thread held, carried by people whose names we will never know, whose faces are lost to time, but whose quiet perseverance shaped every life that followed. When DNA reveals these ancient echoes, it offers a soft reminder of how close our story came to ending before it truly began. The bottleneck sits far behind us, but its imprint remains. It is woven into the shared patterns that connect every living person, a gentle reflection of a time when the world grew narrow and our species passed through one of the smallest gates in its long journey. Long before early humans began to spread their stories across the earth, the planet itself prepared an event so vast that it would echo through the climate for years. It began beneath the ground, deep within chambers of molten rock that shifted and pressed against the crust above. For a long while, these movements remained hidden, heard only in small tremors, and felt only in subtle changes in the land. Then, in a moment of release, the world opened. The Toba eruption was not like the familiar eruptions that paint the sky with brief plumes of ash. It was an event far beyond the scale of anything human eyes have witnessed. Scientists often compare volcanic power to explosives so that the mind can hold some sense of the energy involved. In this case, the comparison is almost abstract. The eruption released energy thousands of times stronger than the detonation that once reshaped the city of Hiroshima. Entire valleys of magma rose into the air. The sky brightened with light so intense that it could be seen for hundreds of miles, then darkened again as ash surged upward like a mountain made of dust. The eruption reached high into the atmosphere, higher than most clouds have ever touched. Once there, the ash began to stretch across the winds that circle the planet. It drifted outward in long, pale sheets. Each particle was small enough to ride the breath of the sky, light enough to travel from one continent to another. Over time, the sunlight itself began to change. It softened from bright gold to a muted gray. Shadows grew longer. Days felt shorter, even though the earth continued its steady turn. With sunlight dimmed, temperatures began to fall. The cooling was not uniform. Some regions felt the change within a few seasons. Others took longer, their warmth slowly replaced by a cold that crept into the soil. Plants that depended on steady light struggled first. Their leaves weakened. Their roots reached deeper for energy that no longer arrived. The animals that relied on those plants began to move, searching for food that had become scarce. This reshaping of life did not happen in an instant. It happened quietly, in small steps that accumulative into vast changes. For early humans, already living close to the margins of survival, the cooling world presented a new and difficult landscape. These were not communities sheltered by thick walls or protected by stored harvests. They were small groups who carried their lives with them, who read the land through the shape of its rivers and the paths of its animals. When the light dimmed, they felt it. When the plants grew thinner and animals traveled farther, they followed. The land beneath their feet grew colder, and the winds that once carried scents of greenery now held the stillness of approaching winter. Imagine waking to landscapes in which familiar colors have faded. Grass that once shimmered with early morning light stands gray and frost-tipped. Trees hold their leaves longer, as if reluctant to let them fall. The horizon loses its warmth. For early humans, each day required more movement. They traveled greater distances to find water that had not frozen and animals that still roamed the sparse plains. Fires became even more important, not only as sources of heat, but as beacons of safety in a darkening world. The ash that circled the earth did not fall evenly. In some regions, it settled like a soft blanket across the ground. In others, it remained in the sky for years, filtering sunlight through a veil that never fully lifted. The cold spread through the seasons, turning mild winters into long stretches of hardship. The delicate balance of early ecosystems shifted. Plants adapted slowly, and the animals that survived had to adjust their movements, their feeding patterns, and their shelters. For humans, already navigating fragile paths through a world of limited resources, these changes cut deeply. Food sources dwindled. Hunting became unpredictable. Rivers froze earlier in the year. Children grew up in conditions harsher than their parents had known, learning to read the signs of cold more quickly, to hear the quiet warnings of the wind. The world had grown quieter overall. Even the usual calls of animals were muted. The landscapes, wide and ancient, seemed to pause under the weight of the ash that still lingered above. This period of cooling did not last forever. Slowly, the ash began to settle. Slowly, the sunlight found its way back through the thinning veil. Plants began to recover in certain places, bringing new life to lands that had endured long months of scarcity. Early humans followed these signs, moving toward regions where the world felt a little more forgiving. But the memory of the cold and the difficulty it brought settled into the lineage of the species. It shaped the patterns of movement, the clusters of communities, and the quiet resilience that continued forward through generations. The Toba eruption remains one of the most powerful volcanic events known in Earth's history. Its effects rippled through climate systems, ecosystems, and lives. For early humans, it formed a chapter of endurance written into the landscapes they crossed and the fragile paths they traced toward the future. In the long timeline of the planet, it was a moment when the sky dimmed and the earth cooled, and humanity walked through a world altered by forces far beneath their feet. Long after the ancient supereruptions that shaped the early struggles of our species, the earth continued to breathe through its volcanoes. These breaths were smaller than the great upheavals of prehistory, yet powerful enough to bend the fate of entire regions. They carried ash into the sky, changed the color of sunlight, and altered the rhythm of the seasons. In human memory, these events appear as strange years when the world dimmed without warning and familiar patterns of life slipped quietly out of place. One of the clearest examples unfolded in the early 19th century when Mount Tambora erupted with a force the world had not seen in centuries. It was the year 1815. The eruption shook the Indonesian archipelago, sending columns of ash into the upper layers of the atmosphere. At first, the impact seemed local. Forests fell beneath waves of hot debris. Ash settled across islands in thick gray blankets. But high above, the eruption created a veil that the winds carried far beyond its birthplace. This veil did not fall to the ground quickly. It lingered, drifting slowly through the sky, spreading around the world. As the months passed, the sunlight dimmed in places far from Tambora. In Europe and North America, people noticed that the warmth of spring seemed hesitant. Snow fell in late months. Frost clung to fields that should have been green. The year became known as the year without a summer. Crops that depended on steady warmth grew poorly. Harvests were thin, animals struggled to find food. Rainstorms came in strange patterns. For communities that live close to the land, each day carried a quiet uncertainty. They had no knowledge of the volcano that had darkened their skies. They felt only the consequences stretched across the rhythm of seasons that had turned unfamiliar. Centuries earlier, in the year 1257, another eruption had reshaped the climate. This one came from the Samalas volcano on the island of Lombok. The eruption was immense, sending ash into the stratosphere where it began a long journey across the globe. Medieval records from distant continents describe years of dimmed sunlight, cold summers, and harvest failures. Fields that once yielded abundance produced little. Grains grew weak. Fruit trees bore fewer blossoms. In many regions, people faced shortages that tested the endurance of entire communities. Volcanic winters do not arrive with sudden silence. They appear slowly, as if the planet is drawing a thin curtain across its skies. The cooling may seem mild at first, a slightly later thaw, a colder night, a longer stretch of clouded afternoons. But when sunlight is reduced for more than a single season, the effects accumulate. Plants that rely on predictable cycles begin to falter. Animals that migrate or breed according to temperature find their patterns disrupted. For humans who depend on agriculture, each failed growing season compounds the challenge of feeding a population that counts on stability. Across generations, repeated volcanic winters create a strain that is not always visible in a single moment. Children who grow up during such periods may experience limited nutrition. Communities may relocate, searching for lands with more dependable conditions. Knowledge about crop cycles and seasonal patterns can become less reliable. Even after the skies clear and temperatures rise again, the recovery can take many years. Early societies had few defenses against these long nights. Even modern societies, with all their technology, would struggle under the weight of prolonged sunlight loss. Food production relies on steady seasons and predictable warmth. Energy systems depend on clear skies for solar power and consistent weather for transportation and distribution. Volcanic winter disrupts these foundations in ways that cannot be solved quickly. The earth cools, clouds thicken, airborne particles reflect sunlight back into space. These changes ripple through agricultural systems, water cycles, and human infrastructure. In the centuries after Tambora and Samalas, smaller eruptions continued to remind humanity of the planet's quiet power. None matched the scale of those earlier events, yet each one carried lessons about fragility. A thin layer of ash high in the atmosphere can shift climates across oceans. A single year of poor sunlight can reshape economies. A second year can strain entire nations. Multi-year volcanic winters challenge the resilience of societies, testing the balance between preparation and uncertainty. Volcanic ash behaves differently when it settles on the land and when it floats above the atmosphere. On the ground, it can enrich soil over time, feeding future forests and fields. In the sky, it becomes a mirror that reflects light away from the surface. When enough ash remains suspended at high altitudes, the world grows dimmer even on days without clouds. People notice sunsets deepening into unusual colors, the sun appearing as a pale disk rather than a warm beacon. These are quiet signs of the Earth's own processes at work, reminders of forces that shape climates without regard for human prediction. Through all recorded history, humanity has adapted, endured, and rebuilt after these disruptions, yet the pattern remains. Sunlight is a delicate lifeline. When the planet chooses to dim it, even briefly, the consequences reach far beyond the horizon of the eruption itself. The long nights of volcanic winters settle not only upon landscapes but upon the patterns of life that depend on light. They linger in historical memory as years when the seasons shifted and the world felt slightly out of tune, held in the lingering shadow of ash that drifted across continents and touched the lives of people who never saw the volcano that sent it there. Long before written language, long before the first carved tools found their way into the soil, the earth shaped its own chapters through wind, water, and time. Some of these chapters can still be read today in places where nature keeps its memories safe. The quiet layers at the bottom of ancient lakes, the delicate mineral curtains that hang inside caves. The lines etched through these formations act like soft echoes of climates long gone, revealing ages when the continent that cradled early humanity was transformed by thirst. Scientists journey to these places to understand the climate of distant millennia. When they collect samples from lake beds, they uncover layers that tell stories of abundance and scarcity. Thick bands of fine sediment reveal periods when waters were deep and alive. In other layers, the patterns thin until they almost disappear, showing times when the lake had shrunk or vanished entirely. These layers, stacked patiently over thousands of years, offer evidence of megadroughts that reshaped Africa again and again. Inside caves, the formations grow slowly through dripping water rich in minerals. The thickness and chemistry of these formations shift in response to rainfall above. During wet periods, they grow steadily, forming smooth sheets that glisten under the dim light. During long droughts, the growth slows to a near stop. The result is a subtle change in the minerals that build them, a change that becomes a permanent record of times when the sky withheld its rain. The evidence from lake sediments and cave formations reveals that Africa did not face brief seasons of dryness. It endured megadroughts that lasted thousands of years. These were not moments of temporary hardship but eras when the land breathed dust and rivers faded into memory. Water, which had sustained early humans for countless generations, became a fragile resource scattered across shrinking pockets of survivable terrain. Imagine an Africa where great lakes evaporated until only cracked basins remained. Shorelines retreated far beyond the places where early communities once gathered to fish, drink, and cool themselves. Rivers thinned into narrow threads that wound quietly across the landscape. Grasslands turned pale and brittle. Forests pulled back toward the few remaining sources of moisture. Even the animals moved differently. Their migrations stretched into longer and more unpredictable paths. For Homo sapiens, still young as a species, these megadroughts presented one of the greatest challenges of survival. The world they knew was contracting around them. Regions that once offered reliable shelter could no longer sustain life. Waterholes that had been visited for generations dried until only dust remained. Plants that once fed small groups with roots and fruit could no longer grow. The land offered fewer places to rest, fewer places to raise children, fewer opportunities to gather food and water. Yet, within this shrinking landscape, small pockets of habitability endured. These refuges may have been stretched along coastal regions where ocean winds brought moisture inland. Some may have existed near highlands where cooler temperatures preserved trickles of water. Others likely formed around underground springs where water pushed quietly toward the surface even as the larger rivers fell away. These pockets became sanctuaries, scattered like lanterns across a darkening land. It was within these scattered refuges that early humans learned resilience shaped by necessity. Groups grew smaller and more mobile. They traveled between patches of survivable land when conditions allowed, sometimes walking long distances guided by memory, instinct, and the faint trails left by migrating animals. Knowledge became a lifeline. Skills that helped secure food from difficult environments were passed down through generations. Ways of finding underground water, reading shifting winds, and identifying edible plants became essential pieces of wisdom woven into daily life. The megadroughts did not simply test early humans, they sculpted them. As the land grew harsher, the groups that survived adapted to new rhythms. Cooperation became more important within families and small communities. Movements grew deliberate, food sources diversified as humans learned to rely on whatever the climate allowed them to find or hunt. Even their bodies and minds carried the imprint of these long droughts, shaped by the need to endure slow changes that lasted far beyond the length of any single lifetime. Over time, some regions of Africa recovered their rains. Lakes filled again, rivers strengthened, plants returned in gentle waves. The landscape, once silent under the weight of drought, began to breathe with new life. Early humans followed these changes, expanding into lands that had once pushed them away. Yet the memory of the droughts lingered within the patterns of their survival. Population sizes grew slowly, shaped by the long period when the Earth had offered so little. As scientists continue to trace these ancient climates through sediments and mineral layers, the scale of these megadroughts becomes clear. They were not isolated events, but part of a long climatic rhythm that repeatedly tested the endurance of human ancestors. The continent that nurtured early humanity was also one that demanded adaptability and strength from those who lived upon it. The story of these megadroughts is carried quietly within the landscapes of Africa even today. In the dry valleys, the old lake beds, and the caves where mineral sheets glow softly, the record remains. It tells of times when the world narrowed again and again, and when small groups of humans found ways to survive within its changing shape. These moments, stretched across thousands of years, formed another narrow passage in the long journey of our species. A passage carved not by fire or ash, but by the slow and powerful absence of water. There are moments in Earth's history when change does not unfold slowly like the passing of seasons, but instead arrives with the swiftness of a breath. The younger Dryas was one such moment. It appeared near the end of the last great ice age, a time when the world had been gradually warming and life was beginning to settle into new patterns. Glaciers were melting, rivers flowed stronger with fresh water, plants spread across lands that had been frozen for thousands of years. Humans, too, were starting to build steadier lives in many regions, finding comfort in the return of warmth. Then, in a span so brief that it seems almost impossible, the world cooled again. Within a few years, temperatures fell sharply across much of the northern hemisphere. Climates that had been softening suddenly grew severe. Plants that had begun to grow in new territories found themselves trapped under unexpected frost. Animals that had followed the warmth northward struggled to survive as the cold returned. The shift was so abrupt that scientists often describe it as the world freezing overnight, a poetic way of capturing just how quickly nature can reverse itself. The cooling sent ripples through the delicate balance of food webs. These webs, formed by countless connections between plants, animals, insects, and the land itself, depend on steady conditions to thrive. When temperatures fell, many of these connections weakened. Plants that had begun to bloom earlier in the year failed to produce enough nourishment. Herbivores struggled to find the food they needed, and their decline affected the predators that depended on them. Streams altered their flow as ice returned to higher altitudes. Lakes grew colder, changing the behavior of fish and other aquatic life. In a matter of years, landscapes that had been filled with promise shifted into quiet hardship. For early humans, the younger Dryas arrived at a time when communities were beginning to settle into more stable ways of living. Some groups had started cultivating wild grains. Others had built seasonal shelters along rivers and lakes that offered reliable food. These settlements depended on the warming climate. When the cold rushed back through the world, many of these fragile footholds were lost. Harvests that had once supported villages were reduced. Animals moved unpredictably, breaking patterns that hunters relied on. Water sources froze for longer periods. The familiar rhythms of daily life were reshaped by the sudden chill that wrapped itself around the land. Imagine a group of early humans waking to a world they thought they had left behind. Snow returns to valleys that had begun to green. Winds grow colder, sharper. The tools and knowledge that once worked in a warming climate no longer meet the needs of the new world. Communities that had felt rooted are forced to move again, following the path of food and shelter across landscapes made uncertain by the abrupt return of winter. Some groups adapted by becoming more mobile. Others gathered closer to the few remaining regions where the cold was softer and water remained accessible. The cause of the younger Dryas has been the subject of quiet debate among scientists for many years. One of the leading ideas points toward the melting ice sheets of North America. As the planet warmed, enormous volumes of fresh water poured into the oceans. If enough of this fresh water entered the North Atlantic at once, it could have disrupted the ocean currents that carry warm water from the equator toward the poles. These currents act like a vast conveyor of heat. If they slow or stop, the temperature of the regions they warm can fall dramatically. A shift in this conveyor could explain the sudden cooling that defined the younger Dryas. Another idea suggests that the eruption of a large volcano might have sent ash and particles high into the atmosphere, reflecting sunlight and cooling the planet. Volcanic aerosols can linger for years, altering global temperatures. Yet clear evidence of such an eruption at the right time has been difficult to confirm. Some researchers have explored the possibility of an extraterrestrial trigger, such as fragments of a comet entering the atmosphere and changing climate through atmospheric dust. This idea remains debated, shimmering on the edge of scientific understanding. What is certain is that the younger Dryas represents one of the most rapid climatic shifts in the recent geological past. Its effects were felt across continents, reaching into the daily lives of humans who had no way to understand the forces shaping their world. These early communities showed remarkable adaptability. They reorganized their movements, adjusted their tools, and found new strategies for living within colder, harsher environments. Yet the shock still left marks on their patterns of settlement, their migrations, and their relationship with the land. As the younger Dryas eventually came to an end, the world warmed once more. This thaw opened pathways for agriculture, larger communities, and the slow rise of civilizations. But the memory of the event remains written in ice cores, lake sediments, and ancient pollen grains that reveal the sudden pause in warming. The Earth had demonstrated its ability to change direction swiftly, holding humanity in a moment of suspended breath before releasing it again into a new chapter of possibility. As the last echoes of sudden cold faded from the younger Dryas, the Earth continued to move through cycles that were anything but gentle. Warming resumed across continents, yet it did not arrive with smooth grace. Instead, the planet entered periods marked by sharp turns and abrupt swings, as if the climate itself were shifting from one direction to another with little warning. Scientists who study ancient layers of ice and sediment have discovered moments when temperatures rose or fell by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius within the span of only a few decades. In geological terms, this is the blink of an eye. Even in human terms, it is barely more than a lifetime. These dramatic shifts form part of what researchers sometimes call climate whiplash, a pattern where the world does not steadily warm or cool but jolts between states. The Earth has always changed, yet these sudden jumps place pressures on life far beyond what slow transitions create. A plant species can adjust to small changes in temperature if they come gradually. Animals can migrate or develop new habits when the shifts unfold across many generations. But when the climate turns sharply, ecosystems lose the time they need to adapt. The pace of change becomes the danger, not the direction. Imagine a valley where early humans once lived, surrounded by forests that offered fruit, shade, and shelter. In a stable climate, the valley changes slowly over centuries. Yet during periods of climate whiplash, warmth pours into the region in a few short years. Streams swell with melted snow, vegetation shifts its growing season, and animals wander into new territories. Then, just as the valley begins to settle into its warmer state, the climate swings again, dropping temperatures with sudden severity. Plants that flourished in the warmth struggle to withstand the cold. Animals retreat, searching for more stable ground. The valley becomes unpredictable, a place where the land no longer behaves in ways familiar to its longtime inhabitants. These abrupt shifts ripple across the intricate web of life. Food webs weaken. Plants that rely on steady warmth cannot keep pace with the cold. Animals that thrive in cooler conditions find themselves unprepared for sudden heat. Even insects, small as they are, depend on predictable seasons to reproduce and feed. When the timing of flowers changes, pollinators fall out of sync with the plants they rely on. Each small imbalance spreads outward, affecting species that never directly experience the initial change. Ecosystems breathe as one. When one part falters, the entire system trembles. For early humans, these rapid swings shape the paths their ancestors walked. The growing unpredictability of landscapes pushed people to move more often. Migration patterns stretched across wider distances. Families traveled from drying plains to wetter coastlines, from cooling forests to warmer valleys, always chasing the narrow bands of land that still offered stability. These journeys were not grand migrations with clear destinations. They were slow adjustments, steps taken in search of water, food, and safer ground. The rhythm of movement became part of the human experience, woven into the long history of exploration and adaptation. The reason rapid swings are more dangerous than steady climates lies in the speed at which life must change. Even a shift of a few degrees across centuries gives species time to adapt, to evolve, or to relocate. But a shift of 10 to 15 degrees within decades is far faster than most organisms can adjust. Trees cannot walk toward cooler regions. Coral cannot rebuild itself in a few years after sudden warming. Mammals that depend on specific seasonal cues find those cues altered beyond recognition. The world becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is the most difficult challenge for any species that relies on routine to survive. For humans, unpredictability meant that knowledge passed down through generations lost some of its power. Lessons tied to local climate became less reliable. A river that flowed each spring might remain frozen. A region that once held game animals might empty overnight. Groups that had lived in the same place for many decades found themselves relearning the land, adjusting old habits, and testing new routes. The bond between people and place grew more fluid as the planet continued to reshape itself. Climate whiplash also changed the shape of human communities. Smaller groups had more flexibility to move quickly. Larger groups faced greater difficulty finding enough resources to support everyone. Movement across open landscapes allowed early humans to encounter new environments, new species, and new challenges. In some cases, these migrations opened pathways that would one day lead to settlement across vast regions of the Earth. But in the moment, they were responses to a shifting world pressing from behind. The climate did not ask permission for these changes. It did not slow itself for the sake of species struggling to keep up. In this era, the world demonstrated its ability to transform rapidly, revealing the delicate balance that holds ecosystems together. Evidence of these ancient swings remains in the ice cores drilled from polar regions, where tiny bubbles of trapped air reveal the temperatures of long ago. They remain in the layers of ancient lakes, where shifts in sediment show when waters rose or fell. These records speak of a planet capable of changing its face with startling speed. Through it all, early humans continued to walk forward, guided by resilience and the instinct to adapt. The climate whiplash era became another chapter in the long story of survival, a time when the Earth's changes forced movement, innovation, and quiet endurance across generations. As the Earth moved out of its cycles of sudden cold and warmth, the great ice sheets that had once covered wide regions of the planet began to retreat. Their melting did not happen with quiet grace. It arrived in pulses, sudden releases of water that poured into the oceans with a force shaped by centuries of accumulated ice. These meltwater pulses lifted the seas by several meters within the span of a single human lifetime. To the people living then, the world would not have appeared to be gradually changing. It would have felt as if the ocean itself were rising to meet the land. Imagine standing along a shoreline that your parents and grandparents had known well, a familiar beach, a fishing ground, a place where early shelters might have been built from driftwood and stone. In the time of your childhood, the tide comes a little farther inland. In the time of your young adulthood, a nearby river meets the sea in a different shape. By the time your children grow, parts of the coast have vanished beneath water too deep to cross. What was once stable becomes a shifting boundary, pushed inland year after year by a world warming from the release of ice. During the most dramatic of these pulses, sea levels surged upward as though the planet were inhaling. Oceans that had been constrained for tens of thousands of years expanded into valleys and plains. Salt water reached into places that had once held freshwater lakes. Low-lying forests were drowned. Marshlands turned into distant seafloors. Each meter of rise erased something, and in total these early surges contributed to a transformation that eventually lifted the oceans more than 60 meters higher than they had been during the height of the Ice Age. The coastlines humans once walked are now hidden beneath waves. Vast regions where communities may have gathered, hunted, or crafted tools lie preserved under layers of silt and sand. These were not minor settlements. They were entire worlds, shaped by the rhythm of tides and the patterns of the seasons. People built their lives around these coasts, which offered food, shelter, and gentle corridors for movement. As the seas rose, those worlds drowned quietly, taking with them memories that would never be carved into rock or recorded in any lasting form. Archaeologists searching for traces of early humans often find themselves looking inland, in caves or along riverbanks, because those places remain accessible. But evidence suggests that many of the earliest gatherings, some of the first symbolic practices, and countless everyday moments unfolded along coastlines that no longer exist. Tools and artifacts found along continental shelves hint at lives once lived where waves now roll above the seafloor. Even underwater mapping reveals ancient river channels and deltas shaped by people long before the oceans claimed them. During the Earth's warming, these drowned landscapes were not lost all at once. They disappeared in steps, each pulse of meltwater pushing the ocean farther inland. Some regions would have faced rapid rise, forcing communities to retreat quickly or adapt to new environments. Others would have watched the sea advance in slow rhythms, giving time to move shelters, paths, and gathering spaces. For early humans, the shifting coastline shaped migration, diet, and daily habits. Where land narrowed, people traveled inland. Where new bays formed, they learned different ways of fishing and gathering. The rising seas did more than erase coastlines. They reshaped the climate itself. As the ice sheets shrank, the earth absorbed more sunlight. Rain patterns drifted. Winds shifted their paths. The planet's balance evolved as thousands of years of cold receded into memory. This transition set the stage for ecosystems that would support expanding human populations, yet its earliest moments were filled with uncertainty for those navigating a world whose shapes were changing beneath their feet. Evidence of these changes is found not only through archaeology but also through the planet's quiet archives. Coral reefs, which grow near the surface of warm seas, reveal periods when the water rose so quickly that they could not keep pace. Their fossilized remains form stair-like patterns along submerged slopes, each step marking a former shoreline. Sediment cores taken from ocean floors show sudden shifts in mineral content, capturing pulses of fresh water that poured into the seas as ice melted. These scientific records complement the scattered remains of early tools found offshore, together forming a picture of a world reshaped by rising water. For early humans, the rising seas demanded flexibility. Communities shifted inland, following animals and seeking new sources of fresh water. They built shelters farther from the unpredictable edges of the ocean. Where land grew scarce, groups may have merged or separated, adapting their knowledge to new landscapes. Some moved along rivers that continued to offer stable corridors of life. Others explored higher ground where the earth remained dry. Through these gentle responses to an unstable coastline, early humans formed patterns of movement that would shape later migrations across continents. The drowned worlds remain out of sight, resting quietly beneath modern oceans. Yet their influence still reaches into the present, carried through the ways humans learn to adapt to change, to follow shifting resources, and to read the quiet signs of an environment in motion. The story of rising seas is one of loss, but also one of resilience, carried forward through the generations, who found new footholds as the boundaries of land and water transformed around them. Long before the first written languages shaped stories into symbols, long before villages grew large enough to leave clear marks on the land, humans lived with threats that made no sound. These threats did not rise from the ground like ash, nor sweep across the sky like sudden cold. They moved quietly within the body, carried in breath, in touch, in water, and in the unseen world of tiny organisms that existed long before any human knew they were there. When scientists study prehistoric bones, they sometimes find subtle traces of these ancient killers. A fragment of rib may carry the delicate scarring left by tuberculosis. A piece of spine may show the slow wear caused by chronic infection. Microscopic residues trapped within dental plaque reveal traces of ancient viruses and parasites that lived alongside early humans. These clues form a soft chorus of reminders that disease has always been part of our story, older than fire, older than tools, older even than our earliest migrations. In small communities scattered across vast landscapes, illness could move quickly. Life in these early groups relied on constant closeness. People shared food, water, and shelter. Children slept beside elders. Hunters traveled together for days. Gatherers knelt side by side over the same plants. These bonds gave strength to survival, but they also provided paths for disease to spread. A single infection, arriving by chance, could pass easily from one body to the next. Isolated populations faced even greater vulnerability. When a group lived apart for many generations, its members carried a narrower range of immune defenses. Their bodies had not been shaped by repeated waves of pathogens that circulated through larger populations. Without that history, a new illness could strike with overwhelming force. A disease mild for one group could be devastating for another. With few individuals to begin with, the loss of only a handful could weaken the entire community. They relied on each person for essential roles, and the absence of even one could ripple outward into shortages of food, loss of shared knowledge, and the fading of skills that held daily life together. Archaeologists sometimes find signs of communities suddenly abandoned, tools left unfinished, hearths that cooled without being rebuilt, paths leading to empty shelters. While these absences can have many explanations, disease is one of the quiet possibilities. A small outbreak could empty a settlement without leaving clear marks on the landscape. The earth, patient and unhurried, would reclaim the site in only a few seasons, covering the traces with wind-blown soil and new growth. Pandemics are among the oldest threats to humanity because they emerge from the simple fact that life is interconnected. Bacteria and viruses have existed for billions of years, adapting far more quickly than species with long lifespans. In a world where humans lived intimately with animals, water sources, and one another, the exchange of microscopic life was constant. A hunter might pick up a pathogen from an animal during a hunt. A child might drink from a pool visited by other species. A traveler might carry an illness to a distant group without even knowing they were sick. These ancient pandemics were not like the ones we know through modern history. They had no written chronicles, no numbers recorded, no stories told beyond the memories of surviving families. Yet their impact was profound. They shaped which lineages continued and which vanished. They influenced the movement of groups across the landscape, pushing some toward new territories and scattering others into smaller clusters. They affected the growth of early populations in ways that still echo in our genetics. In a world without medicine, survival often depended on natural resilience. Some individuals carried subtle genetic variations that allowed them to resist certain pathogens. These individuals would recover more easily and pass their resilience to their children. Over time, these patterns of survival helped shape the immune systems carried by people today. The quiet battles fought in prehistoric bodies did not end with those individuals. They continue as part of the biological memory woven into every descendant. The signs of ancient disease also reveal how early humans cared for one another. Bones with long-term infections show that individuals lived months or even years with conditions that would have required attention. This means their communities supported them, providing food, shelter, and companionship, even when illness weakened their bodies. Disease shaped not only the physical health of early humans, but also the bonds they formed, the ways they nurtured one another, and the traditions that held their groups together. The world around them was already filled with challenges. Climate shifted, water sources moved, food webs bent under the weight of sudden change. Yet disease added another layer of difficulty. It was invisible, unpredictable, and often unstoppable. A person could look perfectly healthy one day and fall ill soon after. Illness could sweep through a camp quietly, leaving confusion in its wake. As time passed and humans moved across continents, these silent killers traveled with them. They adapted to new hosts and new environments. Some diseases faded, others grew stronger. Each carried the memory of ancient encounters, written not in words but in the microscopic exchanges that shaped bodies over thousands of years. Even without records, the evidence remains in bone, in DNA, and in the patterns of life that endured. These ancient pandemics, though unseen, help define how humans survived, how they formed connections, and how they continued through the fragile corridors of prehistory. In the long story of our species, disease has always walked beside us, shaping pathways in the quiet spaces where life is most vulnerable. As human history moved into times that left clearer marks on the earth, a new chapter of illness emerged, one that would reveal just how fragile even large populations could be. The ancient pandemics that quietly shaped early humanity had unfolded in small communities spread thin across continents. But as societies grew, as villages became towns, and towns became cities, disease found new pathways through the crowded rhythms of human life. In the middle of the 14th century, the world entered one of its darkest and most transformative episodes. A bacterium carried by fleas, themselves carried by rodents, began to move along the expanding networks of trade and travel that connected distant regions. It moved slowly at first, following ships and caravans, then swept outward with a speed that felt almost impossible. When it reached Europe, the disease that would later be known as the Black Death altered the course of history so profoundly that its echoes are still felt today. Within only a few years, nearly 1/3 of the continent's population was gone. Whole families disappeared. Empty houses stood beside fields that no longer had hands to harvest them. Streets that had once been filled with the sounds of daily life grew quiet, broken only by the footsteps of those who still moved through the uncertainty. The scale of loss is difficult to picture, even with modern knowledge. It was not simply a decline in numbers. It was a reshaping of the social, cultural, and biological fabric of entire regions. The disease did not remain confined to Europe. It traveled outward, touching parts of Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Each region experienced its own pattern of loss and adaptation, shaped by local climates, trade routes, and the structure of communities. In some places, the devastation arrived quickly. In others, it spread in slower waves, allowing societies to adjust their practices, sometimes with greater resilience. But everywhere it passed, it altered survival itself. Within the bodies of survivors, the Black Death left marks that cannot be seen with the eye, but can be traced in modern genetics. People with certain immune traits had a greater chance of living through the pandemic. These traits were passed to their descendants, gradually shifting the frequencies of genes related to immune response. Over centuries, these genetic changes shaped how populations across the world respond to diseases even today. The pandemic acted as a powerful, if tragic, form of natural selection, carving pathways through human biology that continue to influence the present. Culturally, the effects were just as profound. Communities reorganized themselves in the aftermath. Labor shortages changed the structure of economies. Agricultural practices shifted as populations adjusted to the new availability of land. In some places, social hierarchies softened for a time, as the need for workers gave common people a stronger voice. In other places, fear and uncertainty led to stricter systems of control. Traditions changed, rituals of mourning grew more elaborate. Art and writing blossomed into reflections on death, impermanence, and the delicate line between life and loss. The Black Death also altered the flow of human movement. Families who survived sometimes left their homes in search of safer regions, creating new patterns of settlement. Urban centers transformed as populations shrank, leaving space that would later be reshaped into new forms of community life. Trade routes reopened slowly, carrying not only goods but new ideas and cultural exchanges born from shared experiences of hardship. What this pandemic revealed most clearly was the vulnerability of humanity as a species. Even as societies grew in complexity and strength, they remained deeply connected to the rhythms of illness. Physical closeness, which had once supported survival in smaller groups, now became a conduit for widespread transmission. Cities, with their enclosed spaces and bustling streets, offered efficient pathways for the spread of disease. The Black Death reminded humanity that population size does not guarantee safety. It is the relationship between humans and their environment, between movement and exposure, that determines resilience. Despite the scale of loss, life continued. New generations grew up in the world shaped by the aftermath, carrying with them inherited immunity, altered cultural practices, and a deeper awareness of the invisible forces that influence survival. The memory of the pandemic lingered in stories, records, and traditions, not as a single moment of tragedy, but as a long period of transformation that guided societies into new eras. Through all its destruction, the Black Death remains one of the clearest examples of how a single disease can reshape the trajectory of humanity. It moved through continents like a shadow, touching bodies, landscapes, and histories with equal weight. It revealed how interconnected life had become and how quickly those connections could turn from strength to weakness. In its wake, the world changed, carrying the imprint of a pandemic that traveled quietly, yet left marks that would endure for centuries. History holds within it many quiet turning points, but some are shaped by forces so sweeping that they leave deep shadows across continents. In the 6th century of the Common Era, the world experienced one such moment. It arrived not in the form of war or volcanic ash, but as a pandemic that slipped through ports, marketplaces, and distant fields, carried by the rhythms of trade and the ordinary movement of life. This event, remembered as the Justinian Plague, marked one of the first times humanity faced a crisis that touched vast regions in the same breath. The disease did not appear all at once. It began near the bustling centers around the eastern Mediterranean, where ships moved between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Along their routes traveled goods, stories, and, unknowingly, the microscopic seeds of an outbreak. As ships docked, grain was unloaded, rats climbed ropes and scurried into warehouses. Fleas, tiny and easily overlooked, found new hosts. Through these small exchanges, the plague entered human communities with quiet efficiency. When the illness spread, it did so with a severity that left chroniclers struggling to describe its scale. In some regions, mortality may have reached half the population, entire districts emptied. Fields were left untended, markets quieted as fear and sickness reshaped the pace of life. The disease struck quickly, overwhelming bodies with symptoms that few healers could interpret, let alone cure. Villages that had thrived for generations suddenly lost the people who sustained them. Cities that had been centers of trade became places of sorrow, their bustling streets replaced by the stillness of illness. The timing of the pandemic unfolded during a period of climatic difficulty. In the years surrounding the outbreak, volcanic eruptions had cast particles into the upper layers of the atmosphere, softening the light of the sun and lowering global temperatures. This cooling brought irregular harvests, weakened food supplies, and placed additional strain on societies already dependent on delicate systems of agriculture. Grain shipments became less reliable. Pastures supported fewer animals. In the midst of this scarcity, the plague found populations weakened by hunger and cold, making its effects even more severe. Climate, disease, and human movement converged in a way that left little room for recovery. The pandemic disrupted the networks that tied distant regions together. Trade slowed. Armies struggled to maintain their ranks. Government officials found it difficult to collect taxes or manage the needs of cities. The Byzantine Empire, which had been expanding under Emperor Justinian, began to falter under the weight of sudden depopulation. With fewer workers, the vast projects of the empire slowed or halted. With fewer farmers, food shortages grew. With fewer soldiers, borders weakened and conflicts became more difficult to control. Communities responded in whatever ways they could. Some families retreated into the countryside, searching for safety in isolation. Others stayed within city walls, forming smaller circles of care around neighbors and relatives. Religious institutions became places of refuge, offering shelter and compassion, even though they too suffered losses. In the quiet spaces left behind by those who had passed, new patterns of survival emerged. People adapted, shifting occupations, moving into abandoned homes, and finding ways to sustain themselves within the altered world. The strain on civilization was not only physical, it was also emotional and cultural. The sudden loss of so many lives left a deep impression on collective memory. Writers described streets lined with silent homes. Leaders debated the meaning of the disaster, wondering whether it was a punishment, a natural cycle, or an unknowable mystery. Trade routes that had once linked continents began to fray. Languages evolved as populations mixed or separated. Art and architecture shifted toward styles that reflected new priorities and new understandings of a world that felt less certain. Yet even in the midst of this collapse, there were currents of resilience. Some regions recovered more quickly, supported by stable climates or stronger agricultural foundations. Others rebuilt slowly, layering new traditions over older ones. The Justinian plague did not erase civilization, but it altered the landscape of human possibility. The empire never returned to its previous strength. Borders shifted, economies transformed. The delicate balance of power across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East changed in ways that set the stage for centuries of future history. The pandemic eventually receded, but the marks it left remained. Bones from mass graves still lie beneath modern cities, their arrangement telling stories of hurried burials during the worst days of the outbreak. Genetic studies reveal traces of the bacterium that caused the plague, allowing scientists to trace its path through time. Even the climate records in ice cores reflect the environmental conditions that shaped the disaster. The Justinian plague became one of the earliest examples of how interconnected human societies had become, and how vulnerable those connections could be when touched by disease. It showed that a single pathogen, carried through ordinary patterns of life, could reshape entire empires and alter the flow of history. The world that emerged from this period was quieter, changed, and aware in a new way of the delicate relationship between human structure and the natural forces that surround it. In this chapter of the human journey, the pandemic revealed not only the fragility of large civilizations, but also the ways people adapt in times of profound uncertainty. Through loss, they found new forms of community. Through disruption, they discovered unfamiliar paths forward. And through the long echoes of the plague, the story of resilience continued, shaped by the shadows of a catastrophe that touched an entire world. As the world moved beyond the distant echoes of the Justinian plague, Humanity entered new centuries marked by shifting powers, growing towns, and intricate networks of trade. Fields stretched wider than before. Roads connected regions that had once been isolated. People lived with the sense that life, though fragile, had found a steady rhythm. Yet beneath this appearance of order, the climate began to change in ways that few could understand or predict. The air cooled, the rains drifted from their usual patterns, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between seasons, a long disaster began to take shape. The medieval climate disturbance arrived gradually, carried on winds that brought colder winters and shorter summers. At first, the changes seemed mild, a delayed harvest here, a cooler spring there. But over years, the shifts grew more noticeable. Clouds hung low for longer periods. Warmth lingered less predictably. Crops that had once flourished with dependable regularity began to struggle. Wheat, barley, and rye matured slowly or not at all. Even hardy plants bowed under the weight of seasons that no longer followed familiar rules. Across Europe, Asia, and parts of the Middle East, communities depended on agriculture with little margin for failure. A single year of poor harvest created hardship. 2 years created fear. But when cold and rain arrived repeatedly, their effects deepened. Grain stores emptied faster than they could be replenished. Villagers searched for edible plants along forest edges. Families thinned their meals, stretching what they had in hopes that the next season would bring relief. Yet the seasons remained uncertain, their rhythm altered by a world shifting beneath the boundaries of human knowledge. Rainfall, once welcomed as a blessing, became a burden in many regions. Heavy rains soaked fields, drowning seedlings and washing away soil that had taken centuries to form. Low-lying farmlands turned into broad pools of stagnant water. Livestock weakened as grazing grounds lost their vitality. Even those who worked tirelessly through the cold and wet found their harvests reduced to fractions of what they once produced. In colder stretches, frost arrived unexpectedly, settling on young crops like a quiet warning. The earth had changed its balance, and the people who depended on it felt the strain in every corner of their lives. As food supplies dwindled, starvation began to spread. It moved quietly at first, through rural villages where families worked the land. Children grew smaller for their age. Adults carried weariness in their faces. When winter arrived, those who had struggled through the summer found themselves with too little to survive the cold months. Hunger softened bodies, slowed thoughts, and made even simple tasks feel heavy. In cities, food shortages grew more severe. Prices rose, markets emptied. People wandered in search of sustenance, often traveling to nearby towns only to find the same scarcity waiting there. Starvation differs from sudden disasters like earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. It arrives gently, almost invisibly, wearing down strength over time. Famines do not announce themselves with a single moment of impact. They unfold through long months when the body draws more from itself than it can replace. This slow erosion affects every generation differently, touching the young and the elderly first, but eventually reaching everyone when supplies run out. It also stretches across borders, following trade routes and regions of shared climate. Even places with mild shortages can fall into crisis when neighboring regions weaken, unable to provide the support they once offered. Because famines move slowly, they carry a deeper completeness than some other forms of catastrophe. A storm may damage a region, yet survivors can rebuild if resources remain. A disease may take many lives, yet leave others with immunity. But famine strips away the core of daily existence, reducing energy, limiting reproduction, and weakening the resilience of entire populations. Communities lose not only people, but knowledge, traditions, and the capacity to recover quickly. When hunger lasts across several seasons, the loss is profound and layered, affecting both the physical and cultural fabric of society. Historical records from this period describe villages abandoned because they could no longer support their inhabitants. They describe fields that fell silent, with weeds overtaking once fertile ground. Chroniclers wrote of journeys taken in desperation, of roads filled with people seeking food in distant places. Trade suffered as merchants struggled to find goods to transport. Governments strained under the pressure of supporting starving populations. Even the weather itself became a source of fear, as each shift in wind or cloud carried the possibility of further loss. Yet within this difficult time, people found ways to endure. They learned to diversify crops in certain regions, planting varieties that required less warmth or shorter growing seasons. They built granaries to store what little they could spare. Communities shared what they had with neighbors, forming networks of care that softened the worst moments. These efforts did not erase the suffering, but they formed a quiet record of human adaptability in the face of a world that felt increasingly unstable. The medieval climate disaster, though less dramatic than a sudden volcanic eruption or a fast-moving plague, altered the trajectory of societies just as profoundly. It exposed the fragility of civilizations built on predictable seasons and reliable harvests. It demonstrated how deeply humanity depends on the thin layer of soil that feeds us, and how easily that balance can be broken by shifts in temperature and rain. Through cold years and wet seasons, through hunger that spread across continents, the world carried humanity through another test of endurance, one shaped by the slow and powerful hand of the climate itself. In the long sweep of Earth's history, even the largest landscapes can transform in ways that seem almost impossible. One of the most striking examples lies in northern Africa, where a vast stretch of land that is now covered in sand and wind-carved stone was once a region filled with rivers, lakes, and wide plains of green. The Sahara, known today as the largest hot desert in the world, was once a home for thriving ecosystems and early human communities that lived alongside animals now found only far to the south. This earlier world is revealed through quiet traces left across the land. Ancient lake beds lie buried beneath dunes. Fossilized pollen from once abundant grasses and trees can still be found in layers of soil that rarely see moisture now. Rock art etched into stone walls shows cattle, giraffes, elephants, and even swimming people, their figures painted with a familiarity that suggests these environments were not distant dreams but daily life. These artworks are reminders of a time when the Sahara received regular rainfall and held landscapes lush enough to support both humans and wildlife in abundance. The shift from green to desert did not unfold in a single season. It began with subtle changes as Earth's orbit and tilt altered the intensity of sunlight across the northern hemisphere. Rainfall patterns that had nourished the region began to drift southward. Areas that once depended on seasonal storms found themselves waiting longer for the sky to open. Rivers narrowed, lakes shrank at their edges, grasslands began to fade into patches. At first, these changes may have felt like episodes of drought, temporary and familiar, but as the years passed, the dryness deepened. Seasons of relief grew rarer, and landscapes that had once welcomed life began to change their character. Over centuries, the Sahara's transformation accelerated. The rains weakened to a whisper across the plains. Plants that survived repeated dry seasons eventually reached their limits. Their roots, once fed by underground water, found emptiness instead. Without vegetation to hold the soil, the wind grew stronger in its influence. It lifted dust into the air and carried sand from one place to another, reshaping the Earth's surface bit by bit. The region warmed as the land lost its green cover, turning even small amounts of rainfall into fleeting moments that evaporated almost as soon as they arrived. For the human communities who had built their lives around the Sahara's lakes and grasslands, the change brought difficult choices. Some groups lived near shrinking water sources and attempted to remain, adjusting their movements and routines to match the new conditions. Others followed the retreating rains, migrating toward regions that still held moisture. Civilizations that had once thrived along the edges of large lakes found those lakes reduced to shallow, seasonal pools. Pastoral groups that raised cattle or goats were forced to travel farther each year to find reliable grazing grounds. The drying of the Sahara created a slow migration that unfolded across generations, reshaping cultural landscapes as profoundly as the physical ones. Some archaeological sites show evidence of once settled communities gradually emptying. Hearths that had been used for centuries fell cold. Storage pits remained half filled. Pottery was left behind, cracked by time and sand. These absences are reminders not of a sudden disaster, but of a climate gradually tightening its grasp. As water disappeared and fertile land shrank, the possibilities for stable settlement also faded. Families and entire groups quietly retreated to regions where rivers still flowed and land could still support crops or herds. The loss of the Green Sahara also altered the movement of animals. Herds of antelope and elephants migrated southward with the vegetation. Predators followed them. Birds that had once nested in wetlands adapted to new habitats. The entire web of life shifted its pattern in response to the drying land. In this slow procession of movement and disappearance, the Sahara became a vast and silent archive of transformation. The story of the Sahara's desertification is one of climate acting as a long-term sculptor, shaping the possibilities available to humans. People living in the region were not unskilled or unaware. They understood the land intimately and followed its changing cues with care. Yet even with deep knowledge, there are moments when the environment changes beyond what any community can adapt to. The Sahara's transformation reached that threshold. It did not erase humanity from the region entirely, but it forced life to regroup, to find new places where water still gathered and plants still grew. In the modern desert, the wind carries sand across landscapes that once supported forests and lakes. The silence that fills the Sahara today stands in contrast to the vibrant life that existed there thousands of years ago. Yet the traces of that earlier world remain, preserved in art, in fossilized pollen, and in ancient river channels that lie beneath the sands. They remind us that even immense regions can change their identity over time, and that climate holds the power to reshape not only ecosystems, but the paths available to human societies. The Sahara's shift from green to desert is a testament to the scale of Earth's transformations. It shows how climate can act as an eraser, slowly removing the environments that once supported communities, leaving behind landscapes that tell the quiet story of lives relocated and worlds lost to time. Deep beneath the crust of the Earth, where molten rock moves with slow and patient force, lie chambers of energy older than any human story. Most volcanoes rise and fall in scales familiar to human time. Their eruptions, though powerful, occupy moments in history that can be remembered, described, and rebuilt from. Yet scattered across the planet are a few places where the power beneath the ground is different in scale. These are the supervolcanoes, vast bowls of magma capable of reshaping climates and continents when they awaken. They do not erupt often. Their silence stretches across tens of thousands of years. but their presence is a quiet reminder that the Earth holds forces large enough to darken the sky for years and alter the future of humanity in a single event. One of the most well known lies beneath the gentle forests and wide valleys of what is now Yellowstone. Visitors who walk through its steaming geysers and bright mineral pools feel only the surface expressions of a system that extends deep into the mantle. The ground rises and falls by small amounts over decades, as if the earth itself were breathing. Scientists measure these movements carefully, watching for signs of change. Underneath, a magma chamber spans an area far larger than any city. Its last major eruption was tens of thousands of years before the first human settlements formed. The land still bears the marks of that ancient event, shaped by an explosion that spread ash across much of North America. On the other side of the world, the Taupo volcanic zone in New Zealand holds a similar story. The eruption that created the Taupo caldera was one of the largest in the recent geological past. It poured ash into the sky with a force that changed the climate for years. The region today is calm on the surface, filled with lakes and rolling hills. Yet geothermal vents, hot springs, and shifting ground reveal a deeper energy waiting beneath. It is a landscape shaped by fire and water, a place that carries a memory of the Earth's capacity for sudden change. In southern Italy, near the Bay of Naples, lies Campi Flegrei, a sprawling caldera that has shown signs of restlessness in recent decades. The ground there rises slowly, forming subtle bulges that residents can feel only through careful measurement. Small swarms of earthquakes pulse through the region from time to time. Steam escapes from ancient fumaroles. Though the last major eruption occurred thousands of years ago, the land holds a living reminder that the supervolcano beneath it is not extinct. It simply sleeps, as supervolcanoes often do, through intervals longer than entire civilizations. If any of these giants were to awake with full force, the effects would reach far beyond the local landscapes. Supervolcanoes do not simply release lava. They eject vast quantities of ash into the atmosphere, sending fine particles into high altitudes where winds carry them across continents. In severe eruptions, the ash can circle the globe, forming a thin layer that reflects sunlight back into space. The world beneath grows dimmer. Temperatures drop, crops fail, weather patterns shift. These changes do not last for days or weeks. They can linger for years, creating volcanic winters similar to, but often more severe than, those caused by smaller eruptions such as Tambora or Samalas. Ashfall itself becomes a slow-moving danger. Thick layers bury buildings, smother forests, and contaminate water supplies. Roads become impassable, communication networks fail, airports close. In areas closest to the eruption, the weight of ash can collapse infrastructure. Farther away, even thin layers can disrupt agriculture and health. The earth breathes out material that affects every aspect of human life, from food and water to travel and shelter. In the modern world, humanity has grown in number and spread across nearly every region of the planet. Cities hold millions of people. Coastal regions and river valleys support agriculture that feeds billions. If a supervolcano erupted today, relocating entire populations would not be simple. The world is too interconnected, its societies too large, its infrastructure too fixed to allow billions to move quickly. The resources required to feed and shelter so many people during years of reduced sunlight would challenge every structure humans have built. Even with advanced technology, global distribution networks, and scientific knowledge, the scale of such an event would stretch the limits of human capability. This is not a story of fear, but a reminder of scale. Supervolcanoes operate on timelines much longer than human lifespans. Their silence is not a promise of safety, but part of their nature. The Earth has always carried the potential for sudden transformation within its deep chambers. Humanity has learned to adapt to droughts, ice, disease, and the slow shifting of continents. Yet an eruption of this magnitude would be something different, not because it is malicious, but because it stems from forces beyond the reach of human planning. Despite these possibilities, scientists continue to study supervolcanoes with care and patience. Satellite imagery tracks ground movement, gas emissions are measured, earthquakes are monitored. These efforts do not prevent eruptions, but they offer understanding, time, and awareness. They help humanity recognize the rhythms of the earth beneath its feet. The supervolcanoes of Yellowstone, Taupo, and Campi Flegrei remain part of the planet's deep story, shaped by pressures and heat that have existed since the Earth first formed. Their presence is a gentle reminder that the ground beneath us is alive, shifting through cycles that stretch across ages. In the quiet landscapes above these ancient chambers, the world continues to move forward, holding both the memory of past eruptions and the possibilities of the distant future. Throughout Earth's long history, the ground beneath our feet has never been entirely still. It moves in slow, patient rhythms that shape mountains, widen oceans, and carry continents across the globe. Most of the time, these motions are gentle, unfolding over millions of years. But every so often, the locked plates of the planet release their accumulated strain in a single moment. These rare events, known as mega earthquakes, are powerful enough to reshape entire coastlines, redraw river mouths, and alter the habitability of regions where people have lived for generations. One such event unfolded in the winter of the year 1700, long before seismographs or global communication could record its power. The source lay off the Pacific Northwest, where the Cascadia subduction zone runs along the edge of North America. For centuries, strain had built beneath the quiet forests, held in place by the pressure of two immense tectonic plates. On a cold night in January, the boundary between them slipped. What followed was a rupture that extended for hundreds of kilometers, one of the largest earthquakes in the last several thousand years. Although no written accounts survive from the region itself, the land and sea preserved the memory. Along the coastline, forests sank below sea level, their trunks still visible today as ghostly stumps rising from tidal flats. Entire stretches of shoreline dropped several meters in an instant, allowing the ocean to rush inland. Far across the Pacific, in Japan, records describe a great wave arriving with no local earthquake to explain it. Only centuries later did scientists realize that the wave had come from Cascadia, carried across the ocean by the pulse of energy released that night. Mega earthquakes like this reshape the world through both uplift and subsidence. Some regions rise abruptly, lifting beaches into new terraces. Others sink, creating marshes where dry land once stood. Rivers change course. Estuaries widen. Saltwater floods, forest floors that cannot survive its presence. For the people who lived along the coast, such a sudden transformation would have altered every aspect of life. Settlements may have been abandoned, fishing grounds shifted or disappeared. Paths that once connected communities would have been swallowed by the sea. Centuries later, another mega earthquake would remind the world of the power stored beneath the ocean floor. In the year 2004, deep under the Indian Ocean near the island of Sumatra, a fault line more than 1,000 kilometers long ruptured in a sequence that lasted several minutes. The energy released was immense, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. It caused the seafloor to rise and fall in patterns that sent enormous waves outward in all directions. These waves, known as tsunamis, traveled with the speed of airplanes across the open ocean. When they reached coastlines, they grew into towering walls of water. Entire communities along the shores of Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and parts of Africa were swept away. Houses dissolved under the force. Boats were carried far inland. The world watched as images and stories revealed the scale of the tragedy, which unfolded across thousands of kilometers of coastline. In some places, the land itself had changed shape. New inlets formed, beaches vanished, coral reefs sheared apart under the sudden violence of water. In both Cascadia and the Indian Ocean, the earthquakes did more than cause temporary disruption. They altered the geography in lasting ways. The ground in some regions rose permanently. In others, it sank, creating expanses that now lie underwater. These changes affect not only human settlements, but ecosystems as well. Salt marshes grow where forests once stood. Fish populations shift as the shape of coastlines changes. Migratory birds, which depend on certain shorelines, must adapt to new habitats. Human habitability is closely tied to the stability of coastlines. Many communities rely on predictable tides, fertile estuaries, and safe harbors. When a mega earthquake reshapes the land, these conditions can change overnight. Ports become too shallow or too deep, farmland becomes saline, freshwater sources shift direction. People who have known the land through generations must learn it again, adjusting their lives to a coastline that no longer resembles the one they inherited. These earthquakes also remind us of the hidden link between land and ocean. The boundaries we see on maps are not fixed, they rest upon plates that push and pull with immense force. The calm of a beach or the stillness of a forest does not reveal the pressures building far below. Yet the planet holds these pressures patiently, sometimes for centuries, until the moment they escape in a burst of motion that changes the world. Today, scientists study these zones with careful attention, using instruments that measure ground movement by millimeters. They map the ocean floor, monitor small earthquakes, and search for signs of renewed strain. These efforts cannot prevent the next mega earthquake, but they help reveal the patterns of a planet that is always in motion. The stories of Cascadia and the Indian Ocean show how a single moment beneath the earth can ripple outward into decades of transformation. Coastlines shift, lives change. Landscapes rewrite themselves with a suddenness that humbles our sense of permanence. And yet, through these changes, humanity has always found ways to adapt, carrying forward the memory of land that once was, and learning to live with land newly born from the restless heart of the earth. Across Earth's long memory, water has always been a patient sculptor. It shapes coastlines grain by grain, smoothing stone, carving cliffs, and guiding rivers toward the sea. Yet there are rare moments when water abandons its slow rhythm and surges with breathtaking force. These moments, known as tsunamis, do more than move across the surface of oceans. They reshape the land itself. They redraw maps, alter the course of human history, and leave lasting marks that endure in both geology and memory. Evidence of ancient tsunamis appears in places where the ocean should never have reached. High on coastal cliffs, scientists have found layers of sand and shells that could only have been lifted there by waves as tall as buildings. Deep inland, boulders weighing many tons rest in fields far from any shoreline. They were carried by forces far too powerful to be explained by storms or tides. These layers and stones are quiet reminders of events that unfolded long before written records, moments when entire coastlines felt the sudden arrival of water rushing in from the open sea. Some of the most dramatic of these ancient tsunamis were continent-scale events. Thousands of years ago, When vast ice sheets still lingered across northern lands, the melting world created conditions for immense disasters. As glaciers retreated, they left behind lakes trapped between ice and rocky ridges. When these natural barriers failed, they released torrents of water into the ocean. The sudden displacement of so much water created waves that traveled across entire basins. These waves rose up along distant coastlines, sweeping forests, soil, and even early settlements away in their path. What remains today is the geological evidence found in layers of sediment that speak of water arriving with a force unlike anything seen in ordinary tides. Not all tsunamis come from distant ice or shifts in climate. Some are born quietly in the deep ocean, triggered by underwater landslides that can unfold with little warning. The seafloor, like the land above it, is not perfectly stable. Sediment accumulates along the continental shelves, building in layers over thousands of years. Earthquakes, volcanic activity, or even the slow movement of water can loosen these layers. When they collapse, they send great masses of rock and sand sliding downward into the abyss. This sudden movement displaces the water above it, creating waves that travel outward at incredible speeds. Because these slides often happen far from coastlines and in deep water, people on land may have no idea that a tsunami is already on its way. The waves generated by underwater landslides behave differently from those created by earthquakes. They can be irregular, rising and falling in unpredictable patterns. They may arrive sooner or later than expected. In some places, the first wave is not the largest. Coastal communities, even those with early warning systems, face challenges in predicting how such tsunamis will behave. This unpredictability is part of what makes them so dangerous, especially in regions where millions of people live near the shore. Modern coastlines are home to vast populations. Cities stretch along bays, ports connect nations, and beaches draw people toward the ocean's edge. These regions are rich in culture and activity, but they are also vulnerable. A tsunami does not need to be among the largest to cause immense harm. Even moderate events can flood neighborhoods, damage infrastructure, and disrupt entire economies. When a truly massive tsunami arrives, the results can extend far inland, sweeping away buildings and reshaping the coastline in a matter of minutes. The vulnerability of modern coastal populations comes from more than the sheer number of people living near the sea. It comes from the reliance on these regions for food, trade, and communication. Ports serve as lifelines for countries. Coastal agriculture depends on fertile soil that can be ruined by saltwater intrusion. Power plants and transportation hubs often sit close to the ocean. When a tsunami strikes, it affects not only the immediate coastline, but also the networks that connect cities and nations. Recovery can take years, and the landscape may never return to its previous shape. Looking at the geological records of ancient tsunamis, scientists can trace the long history of these immense waves. They find evidence in cores drilled from coastal marshes, where sudden layers of sand lie between layers of soil. They see patterns in coral reefs torn away from the seabed and deposited inland. They study the scars left on sea cliffs, carved by waves that rose far higher than any storm surge. These discoveries reveal that tsunamis have been part of Earth's natural rhythm for far longer than humans have built cities along the shore. Yet, even with modern knowledge, predicting these events remains difficult. The ocean holds many secrets. Its floor is vast, its movements complex, and its forces immense. Scientists can monitor earthquakes and map underwater slopes, but some landslides occur without clear warning signs. Some tectonic shifts happen silently. The challenge of preparing for tsunamis lies in their suddenness, their rarity, and their power. Despite these uncertainties, humanity continues to learn. Coastal communities build evacuation routes. Researchers develop better models to study wave behavior. Satellites and sensors track changes across the ocean in real time. These efforts do not eliminate the danger, but they help societies understand the rhythms of a planet that has always been in motion. Tsunamis, whether ancient or modern, remind us that the coastline is not a fixed boundary. It is a meeting place between land and sea, shaped by forces that operate both gently and violently. In their rare but powerful surges, tsunamis rewrite maps, reshape histories, and leave behind quiet geological stories that whisper across the ages. For most of human history, the sun has been a symbol of warmth and renewal. Its steady glow rises each morning, guiding the growth of crops, warming oceans, and shaping the rhythm of life. Yet beyond its gentle light lies a restless force. The sun is a sphere of boiling plasma, alive with magnetic storms that twist and coil within its surface. Most days, these storms stay contained, hidden from human experience, except as soft ripples in the auroras near the poles. But every so often, the sun exhales with unusual strength. These breaths, known as solar superstorms, can reach across the vast emptiness of space and touch the Earth in ways that echo through every corner of modern life. In the late summer of 1859, the world witnessed one such event. It came to be known as the Carrington event, named after the astronomer who observed a sudden brightening on the sun's surface. At the time, people did not yet understand the connection between solar activity and disturbances on Earth. They could only watch as strange lights filled the sky. Auroras appeared in places where they had never been seen before. Curtains of red and green shimmered over tropical cities, glowing brightly enough to read by. In the early hours of morning, miners in the mountains rose to prepare for work, believing sunrise had come early, unaware that the colors above them were born not of dawn, but of a solar storm racing through the planet's magnetic field. Telegraph systems, the newest technology of the era, flickered with life even when disconnected from their power sources. Some operators felt sparks leap from their equipment. Papers smoldered on desks. Wires hummed with currents created not by human machines, but by the electric breath of the sun. Though disruptive, the world in 1859 was still largely unconnected. Most people lived without electricity. The storm passed, the auroras faded, and life continued, leaving behind stories that would later become clues to a much larger truth. The sun has the power to reach across space and momentarily reshape the world below. In the modern age, the consequences of such a storm would be far more profound. Human civilization now rests upon a web of electricity and communication. Satellite networks orbit the planet, guiding navigation, monitoring weather, and linking distant communities. Power grids stretch across continents, carrying current from place to place with delicate precision. Even the smallest disruptions can ripple outward into global effects. A solar superstorm strong enough to rival the Carrington event could push this network beyond its limits. When charged particles from the sun collide with Earth's magnetic field, they induce currents in the ground itself. These currents move through soil, rock, and metal, entering electrical systems through cables and transformers. Modern grids are built to handle variations, but a powerful solar storm could overwhelm them. Transformers, which manage the flow of electricity, could heat beyond safe levels and fail. Power stations might shut down to prevent further damage. In some regions, the grid could collapse entirely. Restoring it would require time, equipment, and resources that cannot be replaced quickly. Satellites would face their own challenges. As solar particles interact with the upper atmosphere, that layer expands. increasing drag on satellites orbiting close to Earth. Some might fall into lower orbits, requiring correction. Others could experience electronic faults. Communication networks that depend on satellites could falter. Navigation signals could distort. Air traffic over polar regions might need to reroute. Undersea cables, though less vulnerable than satellites, could experience disruptions in their landing stations where electrical components are more exposed. What makes solar superstorms particularly difficult is their unpredictability. The sun follows cycles of activity, but the timing and strength of individual eruptions remain hard to forecast. Scientists use spacecraft to monitor solar winds, magnetic fields, and the patterns of sunspots. They can sometimes provide warnings hours before a storm arrives, but even with advance notice, the ability to protect global infrastructure is limited. Power companies might reduce load, satellites might switch to safer modes, but shielding the entire planet's electrical systems from an event of great magnitude is a challenge humanity has not yet fully solved. Civilization depends on dozens of layers of protection. Among these, Earth's magnetic field plays one of the most important roles. It forms a shield that deflects many of the charged particles streaming from the sun. Without it, solar storms would strike the surface directly, bathing the planet in radiation. This shield has guarded life for billions of years, guiding particles into the polar skies where they create auroras instead of catastrophe. Yet even this ancient protector has its own cycles. Its strength rises and falls slowly over time, and although it remains our constant companion, it is not unchanging. The magnetic field has weakened and strengthened many times in the geological past, leaving open the possibility that future storms may interact with a shield different from the one we know today. Humanity, with all its systems and technologies, now exists in a relationship with the sun that is more intricate than ever before. A single storm can touch power grids, satellites, and communication networks spread across the entire globe. It can dim the lights of cities, silence devices, and leave communities briefly isolated from one another. Yet, it can also illuminate the sky with colors that remind us of the sun's ancient connection to Earth, a connection deeper and older than any invention. Solar superstorms do not come often, but their presence in Earth's story is undeniable. They reveal that even in the quiet glow of daylight, the sun holds mysteries that unfold across space and time. And in the delicate balance between light and charged particles, between shielding and vulnerability, the modern world moves forward under a star that has the power to shape life in ways both gentle and immense. Far above the thin veil of air that surrounds our world, space appears silent and still. Yet the darkness is not empty. It carries ancient travelers made of rock and metal, fragments left from the early formation of the solar system. They drift through the void on paths shaped by gravity and time. Most pass harmlessly, crossing Earth's orbit without disturbance. But every so often, one of these visitors comes close enough to remind humanity that the planet moves through a cosmic shooting gallery, where chance and physics quietly determine the difference between an ordinary day and a global turning point. In the modern era, astronomers have recorded moments when asteroids passed Earth within hours of a possible impact. Some of these objects were discovered only after they had already flown by, their presence noticed in the faint streak of a telescope image. Others were detected only a short time before closest approach, leaving little room for study or preparation. These near-miss events unfold silently, unnoticed by most people on the surface, yet they brush past Earth with distances small enough that the planet's gravity gently bends their paths. One such asteroid, known by the simple designation of a discovery number, passed so close that it slipped between Earth and the orbit of geostationary satellites. Another arrived with only a few hours' notice, its trajectory recognized shortly before it skimmed past the atmosphere. A third was detected after the fact, a reminder that the sky is vast and that many smaller objects remain faint until they draw near. These encounters did not harm the planet, but they stand as markers of how narrow the margins can be when dealing with rocks that move at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. The potential effects of an asteroid depend largely on its size. City killers, as scientists sometimes refer to them, are objects perhaps 50 to 100 meters across. These are large enough to release energy comparable to several nuclear explosions upon impact. They can flatten forests, ignite fires, and devastate regions spanning tens of kilometers. If one were to strike a densely populated area, the destruction would be severe. Historical examples, such as the Tunguska event of 1908, show the power of an object that never even touched the ground, exploding in the atmosphere and leveling vast stretches of land. Far larger asteroids, those measured in kilometers, belong to a different category altogether. These are the continent killers, capable of reshaping climates and ecosystems. The energy released by such an impact would travel through the air, land, and oceans with force beyond anything humanity has experienced. Dust and debris could rise into the atmosphere, dimming sunlight for months or years. Temperatures would fall, food chains would falter. It would be an event that echoes across the entire planet, not merely a single region. Such impacts are rare on human timescales, but they have occurred in the deep past, leaving craters that still mark the Earth today. Despite the progress made in tracking near-Earth objects, our current detection systems are not perfect. Many telescopes look for the sunlight reflected from asteroid surfaces, but these surfaces can be dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Some asteroids approach from directions difficult to observe, such as near the Sun, where the glare overwhelms even powerful instruments. Others are small enough that they appear only as faint points of light, rising from obscurity only when they are already close. Earth-based telescopes also face limitations from weather, daylight, and atmospheric distortion. Space-based observatories help widen the search, but they too have constraints in coverage and sensitivity. The vastness of the sky compared to the tiny size of individual asteroids means that even with modern technology, many objects slip through the net. The detection of an asteroid depends on spotting a speck of light against a backdrop of stars, then tracking that speck across multiple nights to determine its path. This slow and careful work requires time, and time is often what is missing during a near miss. The challenge of finding these objects is compounded by the fact that their orbits can shift. As they pass near planets or other bodies, gravity alters their trajectories. Sunlight itself exerts a small but steady push on their surfaces, changing their motion over decades. This subtle force, known to astronomers but invisible to the eye, can gently nudge an asteroid into a new orbit that brings it closer to Earth. Predicting such changes precisely requires repeated observations over long periods. Even so, each new discovery helps deepen humanity's understanding of the solar system. As telescopes map more objects, patterns emerge. Some asteroids travel in families, remnants of ancient collisions. Others are solitary wanderers. Their movement tells the story of a solar system shaped by countless interactions, each object responding to the invisible pull of larger bodies. Through this delicate dance, Earth continues to move along its path, intersecting with these travelers only by chance. These near misses do not signal immediate danger, but they remind us of the delicate balance in which our planet exists. The night sky, calm and silent from a distance, holds within it the relics of creation. They drift past Earth with quiet indifference, carrying the memory of a time before humans, before civilizations, before even the oceans that now cover the world. In their passage, they reveal the simple truth that life on Earth unfolds within a cosmos where chance and motion entwine across deep time. And as astronomers continue to watch the skies, tracing these faint visitors across the darkness, humanity deepens its connection to the larger universe. Each discovery is a reminder of how small our world is, yet how rich its story has been, shaped by forces both distant and near, both ancient and ongoing, all moving together in the quiet rhythm of space. Far beyond the reach of the planets, past the calm glow of our sun, the universe holds forces that move on scales almost impossible to imagine. Most of the time, these forces unfold in silence, hidden in distant galaxies whose light arrives only after traveling for millions of years. Yet even from across that vastness, the cosmos can produce events powerful enough to reach worlds like ours. Among the most intense of these are gamma ray bursts, brief flashes of energy that shine brighter than entire galaxies for a few trembling seconds. Astronomers have watched these bursts since the middle of the 20th century, when orbiting instruments first detected sudden spikes of radiation in space. At first, their origins were mysterious. No known star or planet could release energy of that magnitude in such a short time. Over the decades, as telescopes improved and observations accumulated, patterns emerged. These bursts came from far outside the Milky Way, from galaxies so distant that their light had begun its journey long before humanity appeared on Earth. The distances did not soften their power. Even from across the cosmos, gamma ray bursts glowed with an intensity unlike anything else observed. Some bursts last only a fraction of a second, others continue for minutes. Many are tied to the final moments of massive stars that collapse into black holes. Others may come from the collision of neutron stars, dense remnants so heavy that a teaspoon of their matter would outweigh mountains. In these moments of collapse or collision, matter is crushed, twisted, and accelerated to extraordinary speeds. The resulting jet of energy, concentrated into a narrow beam, shines with brilliance that dwarfs the combined light of billions of stars. Across the expanse of space, these jets travel in straight lines, fading slowly as they disperse. Most never intersect a living world. Their paths sweep through empty regions or pass by places with no atmosphere to protect them. But scientists understand that if Earth were ever to lie in the direct line of a gamma ray burst, the consequences would be profound. The planet would not burn or shatter. The burst would not strike the ground like a meteor. Instead, the danger would come from the delicate architecture of Earth's atmosphere. High above the surface, the atmosphere contains a thin layer of ozone that shields life from harmful ultraviolet radiation. This layer exists because sunlight and molecules in the upper air have reached a quiet balance over millions of years. A strong burst of gamma rays would disrupt this balance in moments. When high-energy radiation strikes the atmosphere, it breaks apart nitrogen and oxygen molecules, creating reactive forms that combine in new ways. These reactions can strip ozone from the sky, allowing more ultraviolet light to reach the ground. If the burst were strong enough, the ozone layer could thin dramatically, reducing the protection that living organisms depend on. In such a scenario, the effects would unfold not through flames or shock waves, but through subtle shifts in light. More ultraviolet radiation would reach the oceans, affecting plankton that lie at the foundation of marine food webs. Plants on land could suffer from increased exposure. Animals, including humans, would face higher risks of skin damage and weakened immune systems. The transformation would not be immediate, but it would alter the balance of life in ways that ripple outward through ecosystems. Because gamma ray bursts come from such great distances, the radiation they deliver would arrive without warning. There would be no visible sign in the sky, no shift in the wind or ground. Instruments in orbit might detect the burst as it happened, but by the time the signal was measured, the radiation would already have touched the atmosphere. The speed of light makes every arrival instantaneous from the perspective of Earth. Humanity has no defense against such an event. We cannot predict which stars will collapse into black holes or which neutron stars will collide. Even when astronomers identify potential candidates, the timing of such cosmic events remains uncertain by millions of years. There is no barrier that can be built to shield the entire planet. Earth's magnetic field, strong enough to shape solar winds, offers little protection against radiation that arrives in the form of high-energy photons. The atmosphere itself absorbs much of the energy, but it does so by sacrificing its own structure, altering the protective chemistry that supports life. Fortunately, the geometry of gamma ray bursts offers one measure of safety. Their energy is concentrated into narrow beams rather than expanding in all directions. For Earth to be struck directly, the beam must be aimed toward the planet at precisely the right moment. In the vastness of the cosmos, this alignment is unlikely, yet the possibility remains. Geological records hint that mass extinctions in Earth's distant past may have been influenced by cosmic radiation, though the evidence is difficult to interpret with certainty. Even as scientists study these phenomena with deep curiosity, they do so with the understanding that gamma ray bursts belong to a realm beyond human control. They arise from the life cycles of stars, from forces that shaped the early universe and continue to unfold in distant corners of space. Their presence in the story of Earth is subtle, a quiet reminder that the planet exists within a wider cosmic landscape shaped by energies far older and greater than any life within it. Through telescopes that watch the sky, humanity observes these bursts as distant flickers, appearing suddenly and fading just as quickly. They reveal something essential about our place in the universe, that life on Earth depends not only on the conditions of the planet, but also on the calm of the cosmos beyond. And within that calm, rare moments of immense energy remind us that the universe is both beautiful and unpredictable, filled with power that reaches across unimaginable distances to brush the edge of our world. Beneath the crust and mantle, far below the quiet soil where roots spread and stones settle, Earth carries a living heart. It is a churning ocean of molten iron, swirling and folding in slow, powerful currents. From this restless motion rises something invisible, yet essential. The magnetic field, a protective cocoon that surrounds the planet, guiding charged particles toward the poles and shaping the soft glow of the auroras. For millions of years, this field has guarded life from the full force of solar winds and cosmic radiation. Yet the field itself is not fixed. It drifts, wavers, and, on rare occasions, changes direction entirely. The geological record reveals a history etched not in fossils or sediments, but in the minerals of ancient rocks. When lava cools, its magnetic grains align with the direction of the magnetic field at that time, freezing a silent memory into stone. By studying these minerals across layers and continents, scientists have traced a pattern of magnetic reversals stretching back hundreds of millions of years. Sometimes the North Magnetic Pole lay near the Arctic. At other times, north pointed toward Antarctica. The poles have switched places many times, often separated by hundreds of thousands of years, sometimes by millions, and on rare occasions, by only tens of thousands. These reversals are not sudden flips like the flick of a switch. They unfold slowly, often over thousands of years. During these transitions, the magnetic field weakens, becoming patchy and unstable. Multiple poles may appear at once, wandering unpredictably across the surface. The protective shield that normally deflects charged particles thins, allowing more energetic radiation to reach the upper atmosphere. Though life has endured many such reversals, the weakening of the field creates a time of sensitivity when the balance between Earth and the sky above it shifts. As the field weakens, the atmosphere absorbs more energy from solar winds. The upper layers grow more turbulent, and the auroras expand toward the equator, painting the night skies of regions that rarely see such light. These displays, while beautiful, carry a deeper significance. They mark the path of particles entering regions that are usually shielded. In the distant past, such changes may have influenced atmospheric chemistry. Some models suggest that increased radiation could create reactive compounds that interact with ozone, altering the balance that protects life from ultraviolet light. Climate itself may have responded in subtle ways. While there is no clear evidence linking magnetic reversals to major climate catastrophes, the atmosphere is a delicate system, sensitive to even small changes in radiation. Shifts in temperature patterns, wind circulation, or cloud formation could have followed the weakening field, leaving faint imprints in ice cores or sediment layers. These imprints do not point to global collapse, but they hint at a world temporarily unsettled, adjusting to the altered flow of energy from space. Ecosystems, too, would have faced new pressures. Many species navigate using the magnetic field, following invisible lines that guide migrations across oceans and continents. Birds, sea turtles, and even some insects rely on this sensory map. During a reversal, when the field becomes disordered, these creatures may have needed to adapt quickly, relying more on landmarks, stars, or other cues. Most species survived these transitions, but some may have experienced unusual migration paths or disruptions in reproductive cycles. Such changes, though small on the planetary scale, shape the delicate web of life. For early humans and their ancestors, magnetic reversals would not have appeared as dramatic cosmic events. They would have unfolded too slowly to notice directly. Yet, the consequences might have brushed against their lives in quiet ways. Slight shifts in climate could influence where water flowed or how vegetation grew. Changes in atmospheric chemistry might alter the quality of light or the pattern of seasons. Increased radiation reaching the surface, especially at high altitudes, could have left subtle marks on biological systems. Across generations, these effects would weave themselves into the larger story of adaptation and survival. Today, scientists know that the magnetic field is once again weakening in certain regions, particularly above the South Atlantic. This area, known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, allows more energetic particles to reach satellites, occasionally disrupting electronics. Such disturbances offer a small glimpse into how sensitive modern systems are to changes in Earth's shield. Technologies that depend on stable magnetic conditions, such as navigation equipment and communication satellites, feel the effects first. As the field continues to drift and evolve, humanity watches with interest, knowing that although a full reversal is unlikely in the near future, Earth's magnetic heart remains restless. The possibility of a reversal does not signal an existential threat, but it does remind us of how deeply we depend on forces that lie beyond our control. The magnetic field has protected life for billions of years, shaping the boundary between Earth and space. When it weakens, that boundary becomes more permeable, allowing the cosmic environment to press a little closer. Life has endured such moments many times, adapting quietly, reshaping patterns of movement and growth. In the geological memory preserved within rocks, these reversals stand as gentle markers of a dynamic planet. They reveal that even the forces we consider stable are part of a long, changing rhythm. The field will strengthen again, as it always has. The poles will settle into new positions. The sky will return to its familiar patterns. And the story of Earth will continue, guided by the deep currents that flow beneath our feet and the invisible shield that arcs above our world. For as long as life has existed on Earth, the oceans have served as its great cradle. They have carried nutrients across continents, sheltered early organisms from harsh radiation, and offered a stable refuge during times when the land above changed too quickly for life to follow. Yet even the oceans, vast and seemingly eternal, can falter. There have been moments in Earth's deep history when the seas themselves lost their ability to breathe, and the consequences were written across the fossil record in waves of extinction. These events are known as ocean anoxic episodes. In these ancient chapters, oxygen levels in the water plummeted, turning once thriving ecosystems into silent realms where only specialized microbes could survive. Sediments from these periods reveal dark, carbon rich layers, records of organic matter that drifted to the seafloor without decaying because the organisms responsible for decomposition could not function without oxygen. Such layers, found in rocks from many regions of the world, tell of oceans that became still and breathless on a planetary scale. Some of these anoxic events were connected to mass extinctions. During the late Devonian and the Permian periods, for example, large portions of marine life disappeared as warm waters spread and oxygen levels dropped. The seas transformed into stratified layers, with warm, low oxygen water resting above colder depths. Circulation patterns weakened. Once the balance broke, it became difficult for life to return. Entire groups of organisms vanished forever, leaving behind gaps in the fossil record that speak of a world struggling to recover. These events unfolded over thousands of years, guided by changes in climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Volcanic activity, shifts in atmospheric gases, and warming temperatures all played roles in reducing the ocean's ability to mix and replenish its oxygen. When warm surface waters grow too buoyant, they resist sinking, preventing the deep ocean from receiving fresh oxygen. Without this movement, large regions become stagnant. Life that depends on oxygen either migrates, adapts in unusual ways, or fades into extinction. Today, scientists study these ancient episodes not only to understand the past, but also to recognize patterns emerging in the modern world. As the climate warms, the oceans absorb much of this excess heat. The surface grows warmer and expands, forming a thicker layer that resists mixing with the cooler waters below. This stratification mirrors the early stages of past anoxic events. Measurements from around the globe already show areas of declining oxygen, known as dead zones, where fish and other marine animals cannot survive. Some of these zones appear near river mouths, fed by nutrient-rich runoff that fuels blooms of algae. When the algae die, they decompose in ways that consume oxygen, deepening the imbalance. Other zones emerge in open oceans, driven by warming waters and altered circulation. Each of these areas represents a subtle crack in the oxygen system of the sea. The ocean remains vast enough to support life, yet the trends reveal a quiet shift with potential consequences far beyond the water's edge. Fish migrate away from low oxygen regions, reshaping ecosystems as they search for suitable environments. Some species become confined to narrower ranges, increasing their vulnerability to other changes. Predators lose access to prey. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming and acidification, face additional strain as oxygen levels decline. These changes touch human life as well. A significant portion of the world's food comes from the ocean, not only through fish but also through vast networks of organisms that support marine food chains. When oxygen drops, those networks thin. Fisheries that once sustained communities become unreliable. Coastal economies feel the absence first, followed by supply chains that stretch across continents. Even small shifts in ocean oxygen can influence global food systems, reshaping prices, availability, and the stability of regions that depend on the sea for nutrition. Ocean anoxia also affects carbon storage. When oxygen-rich waters circulate normally, the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and transports it into the deep. In a stratified ocean, this process slows. Carbon remains closer to the surface, where it can return more easily to the air. A weakened carbon sink accelerates warming, creating a cycle that reinforces the very conditions that cause the imbalance. Despite the vast scale of the oceans, their oxygen system is delicate. It depends on temperature, currents, wind, and living organisms that move nutrients from place to place. Small changes accumulate. A few degrees of warming shift the balance. Slower winds alter circulation. As these patterns evolve, the deep ocean responds in ways that unfold quietly, far from human sight, yet intimately connected to life above. The story woven into the rocks from ancient oceans serves as both history and reminder. When the seas lose their breath, the effects ripple outward for tens of thousands of years. Life eventually recovers, but the path is long, and the world that emerges often looks very different from the one that came before. In today's oceans, the earliest hints of similar changes appear not as catastrophic events, but as gentle signals in data collected from drifting buoys and research vessels. These signals tell of waters warming and oxygen shifting, of ecosystems subtly rearranging themselves. They are part of Earth's continuing story, a story in which the oceans breathe in rhythm with the climate above. And within that rhythm lies the delicate balance that has supported life for millions of years. A balance that can change when the seas grow still and the world listens to the quiet of oceans without breath. In the long memory of Earth, there have been moments when change did not arrive gently. Instead of slow shifts in temperature or gradual rearrangements of land and sea, the planet leapt forward in sudden breaths of heat, carried by powerful forces rising from deep within the crust and the frozen edges of the world. Among the most dramatic of these forces was methane, a simple gas that holds enormous power when released into the air in great quantities. Methane, locked away in ancient sediments and frozen beneath the seafloor, rests in structures known as clathrates. These are crystalline cages of ice filled with gas that has accumulated over millions of years. As long as the surrounding temperature and pressure remain stable, the methane stays sealed within its icy prison. But the planet does not always remain steady. When oceans warm or seafloors shift, these clathrates loosen. The ice melts, the cages open, methane escapes upward through layers of water and, eventually, into the sky. The geological record holds clues to times when such releases happened on a large scale. One of the most famous events occurred roughly 55 million years ago during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. In this ancient chapter, global temperatures rose by several degrees in a geologically brief moment. Fossils and chemical signatures from that era show that vast amounts of carbon entered the atmosphere, likely from methane that escaped as warming oceans destabilized deep deposits. The result was a world transformed. Forests spread into high latitudes, coral reefs weakened, many species adapted by moving toward cooler regions, while others disappeared entirely. Earlier periods show similar patterns. Sediments from distant epochs reveal signs of rapid methane release, often connected to warming oceans, volcanic activity, or shifts in ocean circulation. These ancient episodes remind us that the planet's climate system can respond to disturbance with surprising speed, especially when large reservoirs of methane are involved. Methane is far more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping heat, although it remains in the atmosphere for a shorter time. When released suddenly, it can drive swift, intense warming, setting off a chain reaction of environmental change. Today's scientists study these past events to understand how modern warming might interact with the frozen methane stored beneath the oceans and within Arctic soils. As temperatures rise, the edges of permafrost begin to soften. Small plumes of methane bubble from lakes in high latitudes, creating shimmering trails that drift toward the surface. In deep marine settings, sensors detect faint signs of clathrates slowly releasing gas, a reminder that these ancient stores are sensitive to even slight warming. Climate models explore how methane might behave in a future shaped by human activity. If warming continues, more clathrates could destabilize, adding additional heat to the atmosphere and accelerating the pattern. This is known as a feedback loop. Warming releases methane, and methane causes more warming. The process may remain small and gradual. Or, like the ancient events written in the rocks, it could scale upward, reshaping ecosystems in ways humanity has not yet witnessed. Life on Earth can adjust to many climates, but humans depend on a fairly narrow range of conditions to maintain stability. Our bodies function best within a limited span of temperatures. Our crops rely on predictable seasons. Our infrastructure, from water systems to energy grids, is designed for a climate that changes slowly. When warming accelerates quickly, these systems begin to strain. Heat can reduce crop yields, pushing food supplies toward uncertainty. Storms intensify as the atmosphere holds more moisture. Regions that once provided reliable harvests may shift into patterns unfamiliar to those who depend on them. In earlier sections, we followed the story of rising seas and shifting climates, moments when human communities adapted to cooler or wetter worlds. Methane-driven warming adds another layer to this story. Instead of gradual shifts over centuries, methane can create changes within decades, compressing the time available for adaptation. A world that warms too quickly challenges the balance humans have built over thousands of years. Coastal cities face greater heat stress, dry regions become harsher, forests burn more easily as temperatures climb. Beyond the direct physical effects, rapid warming influences the delicate networks that connect ecosystems together. Species that migrate upward in elevation or toward the poles may collide with barriers or run out of space entirely. Pollinators change their timing. Rivers fed by melting snow alter their flow. These transformations ripple outward, shaping the landscapes that have guided human life since its beginning. Methane bursts are not constant or predictable. They occur when the planet reaches thresholds, points where small changes trigger larger responses. By examining ancient records, scientists learn how close Earth once came to these tipping points and what followed in their wake. These stories from deep time do not predict the future with certainty, but they reveal the rhythms and sensitivities of a world that responds strongly to warming. In modern times, the earliest hints of methane changes appear as gentle signs scattered across the Arctic and the deep sea. They do not yet resemble the dramatic releases that reshaped ancient climates. Instead, they serve as reminders of how tightly connected Earth's systems are, how heat spreads through ocean layers, how ice remembers old temperatures and responds to new ones. In this quiet narrative of gas and warmth, the planet continues its timeless dance between stability and change. The atmosphere, the oceans, and the frozen edges of the world move together in a shared rhythm, one that has carried life through countless transformations. As long as that rhythm holds, the story of humanity unfolds within a narrow and precious window of climate, a window shaped by forces far older than our species and held in balance by the breath of Earth itself. As the story of Earth moves closer to the present, the forces that once shaped the destinies of early humans continue to follow us, sometimes softened by technology, sometimes unchanged beneath the surface. Among the most delicate parts of our modern world is agriculture, a system that feels vast and abundant, yet rests upon foundations far thinner than they appear. For most of human history, people gathered food from wild landscapes, following migrations of animals and the rhythms of plants. Over time, they learned to plant seeds, shape fields, and tend soil. This quiet partnership transformed human life, anchoring settlements and allowing populations to grow. Yet, despite all its progress, agriculture depends heavily on a surprisingly small cast of plants. A few dozen crops provide most of the world's calories, and within that group, only a handful dominate global diets. Wheat, rice, maize, soy, and potatoes form the backbone of nourishment for billions. These plants are grown in vast fields that stretch across continents, nourished by predictable seasons and supported by careful irrigation, fertilizers, and systems of trade. Because these crops are so widespread, their successes and failures ripple outward quickly. When a harvest falters in one region, markets shift and prices climb. When multiple regions experience difficulty at once, the stability of entire nations can tremble. This fragility becomes clearer when we look closely at the forces that threaten these plants, many of which resemble the pressures that once challenged early humans. Among the most dramatic threats are volcanic winters. Earlier sections of this story followed how eruptions could dim the sun and cool the world. A similar event in modern times would cause growing seasons to shorten. In regions that depend on sunlight for warmth and development, crops could fail before reaching maturity. Frost might strike fields that have not seen such temperatures in many generations. The delicate timing of flowering and pollination, tuned over centuries of cultivation, could be disrupted by the sudden chill and muted light. Drought poses a more familiar challenge, one that has shaped landscapes across human history. As temperatures rise, some regions grow drier, and rainfall arrives in patterns that drift from long established norms. Even a single year of severe drought can reduce yields dramatically. When drought spans several years, soil hardens, groundwater shrinks, and farmers must make difficult choices about which fields to save and which to abandon. Irrigation helps, but only when rivers and aquifers remain full enough to supply it. When these sources fade, even the most advanced farming systems become vulnerable. Blight adds another layer of uncertainty. Plant diseases move quietly, spreading through wind, water, and soil. Some fungi and pests have already evolved to thrive in warmer climates, expanding their reach into new territories. When a blight targets a crop that billions rely upon, the consequences can echo for decades. History holds examples of this, such as the potato blight that struck Ireland in the 1840s, revealing how a single disease can topple the stability of a region. In today's interconnected world, similar diseases can travel far more quickly, crossing oceans in days. These threats become more concerning when we consider how interconnected the global food system has become. Fields in distant countries feed populations far away. Fertilizers mined in one region nourish crops in another. Transportation networks carry food across deserts, mountains, and oceans. This web of connections increases capacity, but it also creates points of failure. When a drought hits one continent and a disease spreads across another, the effects meet in marketplaces, kitchens, and communities that depend on stability. Even temperature plays a quiet but powerful role. Humans flourish within a narrow climate window, and our crops share this preference. Most staple plants require specific ranges of heat to germinate, grow, and produce grain. If temperatures rise too high during key stages, the plants struggle. Pollen becomes less viable. Leaves wilt more quickly. Grain heads form improperly. Each small disruption can reduce yields, and across millions of acres, these reductions accumulate into consequences that reach far beyond the fields themselves. Scientists study these vulnerabilities through climate models and agricultural records. They observe how each degree of warming can reduce the global yield of wheat or rice. They track how shifting rainfall changes the boundaries of fertile regions. From these observations, a clear picture emerges. The margin between abundance and scarcity is thin. Even modest disruptions can tilt the system toward stress. Despite the complexities of modern farming, the roots of this fragility extend back to the same truths that shaped early human survival. Life depends on balance, and agriculture depends on balance even more closely. Stable temperatures, predictable seasons, fertile soils, and reliable water sources allow crops to thrive. When these conditions waver, the foundation beneath our food systems shifts. In the past, small human populations moved toward regions where conditions remained gentle enough to support life. Today, billions of people are anchored to cities, nations, and supply networks that cannot migrate with the climate. Fields cannot uproot themselves. Farms cannot simply relocate when temperatures drift or rains disappear. This fixed nature of agriculture ties humanity to a landscape that may change faster than the systems built upon it. Yet the fields continue to grow each season, carrying seeds that hold the memory of thousands of years of cultivation. Humanity moves forward with the rhythm of planting and harvest, guided by knowledge passed through generations. The fragility of this foundation does not diminish its beauty, nor the quiet resilience within it. It simply reminds us how deeply our story is tied to the soil, the rain, and the gentle balance that allows the world to feed us. Far to the north and south, at the quiet edges of the world, lie the immense ice sheets that have shaped much of Earth's climate for millions of years. They appear still from a distance, stretching across the horizon like pale continents of silence. Yet within these frozen expanses, slow movements unfold. Snow layers build upon older snow, pressure deepens, and ancient ice begins to drift steadily toward the sea. These sheets are more than frozen landscapes. They are reservoirs of water so vast that their rise and fall influence the breadth of oceans across the entire planet. In earlier ages of Earth, the ice sheets grew and shrank in long, patient rhythms. During colder periods, they expanded, locking water away and lowering sea levels worldwide. During warmer times, they retreated, returning that water to the oceans and allowing coastlines to shift. Human history unfolded during one of the more stable phases of this rhythm, a time when sea levels allowed river valleys, floodplains, and fertile deltas to become centers of settlement and culture. Many of the world's great cities grew along coastlines that felt permanent, shaped by tides that rarely changed across generations. Yet the ice is not fixed. As the planet warms even slightly, the edges of Greenland and Antarctica begin to soften. Meltwater flows across the surface of the ice sheets, forming winding rivers that vanish into crevasses and reach the bedrock far below. This water acts as a lubricant, allowing ice to slide more quickly toward the oceans. In some regions, vast chunks of ice break away and drift into open water, melting from beneath as they encounter warmer currents. These changes are small when viewed day by day, but across decades they accumulate into movements large enough to reshape the world. Scientists studying these ice sheets have found signs that parts of them may be more sensitive than once believed. In West Antarctica, for example, glaciers that rest on bedrock below sea level are retreating in ways that could accelerate with time. Once warm water reaches their grounding lines, the points where the ice sheet meets the land beneath the ocean, melting can advance inward. This creates a feedback that speeds the flow of ice into the sea. If such processes continue, sea levels could rise not by a handful of centimeters each century, but by several meters. A rise of even 1 or 2 meters would alter coastlines across the world. A rise of several meters per century, which some models suggest is possible under rapid ice loss scenarios, would reshape entire nations. Coastal megacities, home to tens of millions of people, sit only a few meters above the present sea. Streets, ports, neighborhoods, and historic centers lie within reach of tides that need only a small push to advance inland. Cities like Shanghai, Jakarta, Miami, Alexandria, and Kolkata all depend on coastlines that have remained steady for thousands of years. As sea levels climb, these places face floods that arrive not only from storms, but also from tides that creep upward year by year. Saltwater seeps into groundwater, turning once fertile land into soil too brackish for crops. Protective barriers built to hold back the ocean require constant reinforcement, and even then, nothing constructed by human hands can match the patient force of rising water. Some cities will adapt for a time, building higher walls, redirecting rivers, or creating artificial islands. Others may find adaptation too costly or too difficult, leading to gradual retreat. Behind each flooded street lies a web of economic pressures. Ports that once served as lifelines for trade may need to relocate. Industries that depend on coastal access must shift their operations. Energy grids and transportation systems require redesigning. Insurance markets strain as disasters become more frequent, and governments face the challenge of protecting vulnerable populations while preparing for long-term change. For many communities, the greatest challenge comes not from the water itself, but from displacement. As coastlines change, millions of people may need to move inland. Some will travel only short distances, following roads built along higher ground. Others may find themselves crossing borders, searching for regions with stable land and accessible resources. These movements place pressure on cities that receive newcomers, pushing infrastructure, housing, and social systems to adjust quickly. In the past, humans migrated in response to droughts, floods, and shifts in climate. Today, those migrations involve far larger populations, tied to systems far more complex than the small, mobile groups of early history. Amid these changes, the ice sheets continue their quiet transformation. Each melt season adds water to the oceans, and each winter returns only a fraction of what was lost. The balance that once held firm begins to tilt. These shifts happen slowly enough that no single moment feels decisive, yet swiftly enough that they reshape the world within a human lifetime. The story of rising seas is not one of sudden catastrophe, but of gradual change that touches many parts of life. Fields near the coasts must adapt. Harbor walls must rise. Maps must redraw themselves. As human societies navigate this new landscape, the ice sheets remain distant, yet deeply connected to every shoreline. Their movement mirrors the larger rhythm of Earth, a rhythm that continues to guide the shape of continents and the paths of human lives. In the stillness of these frozen realms, the story of the future's coastlines is already beginning to take form. As the story of Earth arrives in the modern age, the dangers that once emerged only from the sky, the sea, or the shifting crust begin to intertwine with threats created by humanity itself. For most of our history, survival depended on endurance, awareness, and adaptation. Yet in the past century, the scale of human technology grew so quickly that a single error or misreading, occurring in the span of a few minutes, carried the weight of consequences once reserved for volcanic winters or collapsing ice sheets. These moments sit quietly in the background of history, often unknown to those who lived through them, yet each one carried the possibility of ending the world we recognize. One of the most well-known incidents unfolded in the early 1980s, a period marked by tense relations between global powers. Satellites monitored the skies for signs of incoming missiles, their sensors trained to detect the bright flare of launches from across the horizon. One night, a Soviet early warning system interpreted sunlight reflecting off high clouds as the beginning of an attack. The computer alerted the command center that several missiles were on their way. For a brief moment, a few individuals held the responsibility of interpreting what the machines insisted was real. Procedure called for immediate retaliation, yet one officer sensed the pattern felt wrong. He waited. Long minutes passed, and no missiles appeared. His hesitation prevented a chain reaction that could have ignited a global catastrophe. Stories like this reveal how fragile the boundary between safety and disaster can become when technology amplifies human error. Computers are powerful, but they rely on the data they receive. Instruments may misread weather patterns, solar reflections, or even cosmic activity. People interpreting these signals carry their own burdens, influenced by stress, fatigue, or the memory of past threats. In earlier chapters of Earth's story, misunderstanding a sign from the environment might have led to a wrong turn or a missed opportunity. In modern times, misunderstanding can threaten entire civilizations. Another incident occurred in 1995 when a scientific rocket launched from Norway was mistaken for a potential attack by Russian radar systems. The flight path resembled that of certain weapons used to disable communications in advance of a strike. Alarms rose through layers of command. Nuclear briefcases were opened. Leaders prepared to make decisions that could reshape the planet. Only after tense investigation did the truth emerge. The rocket was harmless, part of a research mission studying the aurora. Within minutes, the situation dissolved from global threat to misunderstanding carried by incomplete information. Natural events can also act as silent accomplices in these near disasters. Solar storms, like the one described earlier in this story, interfere with satellite signals, distort communication channels, and create flickers in electrical grids. A burst of charged particles from the sun can confuse radar systems or disrupt the timing signals that guide navigation networks. When such disturbances occur during moments of geopolitical tension, they can appear as deliberate interference or emerging threats. The sun, unaware of human borders, sends its energy outward without intent, yet the systems we build interpret these pulses through the filters of their programming. Earthquakes and undersea cables share similar risks. A tremor in the ocean can cut communication lines, causing sudden data losses that appear suspicious to those monitoring global systems. A power outage caused by heavy storms may resemble a cyber attack to those expecting one. Each natural event whispers through the machinery of modern life, occasionally blurring distinctions between the planet's ancient rhythms and the decisions of nations. Modern parallels continue to arise quietly. In recent decades, several countries have reported false alerts due to faulty sensors, radar ghosts, or misinterpreted computer outputs. In Hawaii, for example, a mistaken alert once warned residents of an incoming missile, revealing how quickly panic can spread when systems fail. In other regions, software glitches have momentarily suggested threats that did not exist. Each time, the error was corrected, yet each incident illustrated how closely human systems rest against the edge of misunderstanding. These near misses highlight a new form of vulnerability that does not replace the forces described in earlier sections, but rather intertwines with them. Where ancient climates tested early humans with drought or volcanic ash, modern societies face dangers shaped by networks, electronics, and the immense power contained in nuclear arsenals. These weapons draw from the same physical principles that fuel stars, releasing energy far beyond anything early humans could have imagined. The danger lies not only in conflict, but in the possibility that a storm, a misread sensor, or a brief mistake could ignite an irreversible chain. Despite the gravity of these moments, the world continued. Systems improved. Communication deepened. Yet the memory of these incidents remains a quiet reminder that even in an age of satellites and advanced computing, civilization depends on steady judgment, clear information, and the calm decisions of individuals who stand between alarm and action. In this part of Earth's ongoing story, the dangers shaped by humanity echo the older threats of the natural world. Both rely on fragile balances. Both reveal how easily stability can turn to uncertainty. And both remind us that the survival of our species has always depended on more than knowledge or strength. It depends on the delicate cooperation between human choice and the shifting environment that surrounds us. In the long arc of Earth's history, disease has always been a quiet sculptor of life. It shaped early human movements, thinned populations, and threaded itself through every generation. In earlier chapters of this story, we walked through ancient pandemics carved into bones and whispered across continents. Today, a new chapter has emerged, one shaped not only by nature, but by human hands. Modern science, with its remarkable ability to understand and manipulate the smallest forms of life, brings with it possibilities that the ancient world never faced. Some of these possibilities are hopeful. Others carry a weight that echoes the old extinction pressures that once hovered over our species. In laboratories across the world, scientists study viruses and bacteria to understand how they evolve, how they spread, and how they can be controlled. They examine genetic structures the way early humans once studied the stars, searching for patterns that reveal deeper truths. By altering certain genes, researchers learn how pathogens respond to change. By recreating conditions that once allowed diseases to flourish, they develop tools that protect millions. These practices save lives every day. They allow vaccines to be created, treatments to be refined, and outbreaks to be predicted before they grow. Yet even with the most careful safeguards, laboratories are places where risk and knowledge exist side by side. Scientific assessments of these risks show that accidents, while rare, are not impossible. A single misstep, a faulty seal, or an unexpected reaction can allow a pathogen to slip from controlled environments into the wider world. When this happens, the consequences depend on the nature of the organism involved. Some are weak, fading before they spread. Others may find fertile ground in human populations, driven by biological traits that favor rapid transmission. Engineered pathogens add an additional layer of complexity. Modern biotechnology allows scientists to adjust genetic sequences with delicate precision. This gives them the ability to weaken dangerous organisms for study, but it also brings the potential to alter traits that influence how a pathogen behaves. In some cases, research aims to understand how viruses might adapt naturally in the future. By observing these possibilities in controlled settings, scientists hope to stay ahead of potential outbreaks. Yet these studies can produce organisms that differ from anything found in the natural world. If such organisms escape through accident rather than intention, they could spread in ways that are difficult to predict. What makes engineered or escaped pathogens uniquely dangerous is not only their biology, but the world they enter. Global travel networks span continents in a matter of hours. Urban areas gather millions of people within small regions. Supply chains connect distant nations through food, water, and commerce. In this interconnected landscape, a pathogen does not need centuries to expand its range. It can move with astonishing speed, riding on airliners, ships, and the simple motion of human lives. This vulnerability mirrors the pressures that shaped early human survival, yet on a scale transformed by modern life. In ancient times, disease could devastate small groups, especially those isolated from larger populations. Today, even the most remote regions connect indirectly to the global system. The old pattern has reversed. Instead of isolation increasing risk, connection does. The world's greatest strength, its ability to share information, trade, and culture, becomes a pathway for microscopic travelers. Some pathogens thrive in this environment. Viruses that spread through air or water droplets rely on close human contact. Bacteria that live on surfaces travel with the objects we touch. Even organisms that once required certain environmental conditions can adjust with surprising speed when exposed to new hosts. The adaptability of microbes, honed over billions of years, gives them an advantage that no modern technology can fully contain. In these ways, engineered or escaped pathogens echo the ancient forces that once threatened humanity. The pressures are similar: scarcity of immunity, vulnerability of small or stressed populations, and the relentless pace of biological change. But where early humans faced these threats within scattered groups, modern society faces them as a global community. Scientific assessments of risk highlight three core concerns. The first is uncertainty. Even well-understood pathogens can behave differently when introduced to new environments. The second is scale. A disease that once affected a single village can now circle the globe before symptoms appear. The third is complexity. Modern healthcare systems must navigate not only the biology of a pathogen, but also public communication, resource distribution, and the fragile balance between safety and freedom. Despite these challenges, humanity has developed extraordinary tools to counter disease. Vaccines, antiviral medications, genetic sequencing, and global monitoring networks offer layers of protection that earlier civilizations could not have imagined. Yet these tools, like the ice sheets and oceans described in earlier sections, rely on balance. They must stay ahead of microbial evolution, respond to emergencies swiftly, and adapt to changes in a world that grows more interconnected each year. As the story of Earth continues, engineered pathogens stand as a reminder that danger does not always come from the deep sea, the shifting climate, or the quiet movement of continents. Sometimes it arises from human curiosity and ambition, the same forces that drive progress and discovery. In this delicate balance, humanity finds itself navigating old threats in new forms, guided by science, caution, and the shared hope of avoiding the mistakes that history records so clearly. In the gentle rhythm of Earth's unfolding narrative, these modern pressures settle beside the ancient ones, shaped by the same truth that has always guided life. Survival depends on understanding, on awareness, and on the fragile connections that hold the world together. As human history moves into its most intricate chapter, the dangers we face begin to weave together in ways that earlier generations could not have imagined. The world is now linked through networks of energy, communication, transportation, and trade that stretch across continents like delicate threads in a vast tapestry. These connections bring comfort, abundance, and speed. They also create a new form of vulnerability, one where a single disturbance can ripple outward, pulling at each thread until entire systems tremble. This is the cascade problem, a quiet but powerful reminder that modern life, for all its brilliance, rests upon foundations that can shift with surprising ease. In earlier sections, we traveled through ancient droughts, volcanic winters, and the long breath of oceans losing their oxygen. Those forces shaped early humanity because people lived close to the land, dependent on immediate surroundings. Today, the story is different. A single storm, blackout, or shipping delay can affect millions, even those living far from the source of the disturbance. The fragility lies not in the strength of individual pieces, but in how closely they depend on one another. Energy grids offer a clear example. Electricity flows across vast networks, feeding homes, hospitals, water treatment plants, communication towers, and the countless devices that shape everyday life. When everything works, the system seems almost invisible, humming beneath the surface of human activity. But when something falters, the interdependence reveals itself instantly. A damaged transformer, an overloaded line, or an unexpected surge can plunge entire regions into darkness. During a blackout, modern life slows to a halt. Refrigeration stops. Gas pumps cease to function. Communication networks falter. Even access to clean water becomes uncertain when treatment facilities lose power. These failures rarely remain isolated. A power outage in one region may increase demand in another, stressing distant systems. A heat wave can push grids beyond capacity, triggering rolling failures that travel from city to city like falling dominoes. Natural disasters amplify these pressures. A hurricane or wildfire can damage infrastructure faster than it can be repaired, leaving communities without power for days or weeks. The energy grid, built to deliver stability, becomes a pathway through which failures travel. A similar pattern appears in the globalized food chain. Modern agriculture relies on transportation networks that carry crops from fertile regions to distant markets. Wheat grown in one hemisphere may feed households in another. Fruits harvested in warm climates cross oceans to reach colder ones. This interconnected system allows millions of people to eat foods their ancestors never encountered. Yet, when a link in the chain breaks, the effects can spread far beyond the origin. A drought in one country can raise food prices across an entire continent. Flooding in a major grain-producing region can strain livestock feed supplies on the opposite side of the world. Political instability in a port city can disrupt the movement of ships carrying essential goods. These disruptions are not confined to distant places. They reach into homes, markets, and communities that rely on predictable supply. In this way, The security of global food systems mirrors the vulnerability of early humans who faced failing harvests. But now the scale is far greater and the consequences unfold more quickly. During large disasters, these systems interact in ways that magnify their weaknesses. When a major storm approaches, energy grids strain from heavy demand as people seek comfort and safety. Roads fill with those trying to evacuate. Supermarkets empty as supply chains struggle to keep pace. Hospitals prepare for emergencies, but rely on generators that depend on fuel deliveries. A failure in any one of these parts can influence all the others. If transportation falters, fuel cannot reach generators. Without fuel, hospitals lose power. Without power, communication systems weaken, making coordination difficult at the moment it is most needed. Disasters that combine multiple elements, such as heat waves, storms, and wildfires, reveal how quickly modern life can move from stability to imbalance. Fires can damage power lines, causing blackouts that disrupt air conditioning during extreme heat. Heat can strain both energy systems and agricultural yields. Water shortages can limit the ability to fight fires or cool power plants. Each challenge interacts with the others, creating a cascade rather than a single event. These patterns echo the ancient pressures described in earlier chapters, but with a modern twist. Early humans faced climate shifts, scarcity, and disease as separate dangers. Today, these old forces merge with new fragilities built into the architecture of modern civilization. A volcanic eruption could disrupt air travel globally, affecting everything from medicine to food shipments. A solar storm could damage satellites, interrupting navigation systems and destabilizing energy grids. A rapid climate shift could weaken harvests at the same time that population demands continue to rise. The cascade problem is not defined by chaos, but by connection. It shows how closely the elements of modern life rely on one another and how changes in one area can reshape the others. Instead of isolated disruptions, humanity now faces layered challenges that unfold across entire systems. Each system is strong on its own, but delicate when bound to others. In this ongoing narrative of Earth, the cascade problem adds a new dimension to the story of survival. It reveals that human progress, like the early steps of our ancestors, carries its own vulnerabilities. Modern life moves with remarkable speed, yet its pace depends on a careful balance of energy, resources, and coordination. When that balance wavers, the effects travel far, reminding us that even in an age of towering buildings and global networks, the world remains deeply interconnected, shaped by the same quiet rhythms that have guided life since the beginning. Even as modern science illuminates the world in ways our ancestors could never have imagined, Earth remains filled with mysteries that move quietly beneath our feet, above our skies, and within the smallest forms of life. Throughout this story, we have followed dangers shaped by ancient climate swings, shifting oceans, volcanic winters, and the delicate machinery of human civilization. Yet, these are only the threats we understand. Beyond them lies a realm of possibilities that science has not yet mapped, a space where uncertainty becomes its own kind of pressure on the future of our species. Across the oceans, hidden beneath thick layers of sediment, lie volcanoes that have never been charted. Most underwater mountains remain unnamed, their shapes discovered only by accidental sonar sweeps from passing research vessels. Some may be extinct, silent reminders of an earlier age. Others may hold chambers of magma that shift slowly, preparing pressure that one day could rise to the surface. Because these volcanoes lie out of sight, any sudden awakening might arrive with little warning. The deep sea muffles its own signals, allowing heat and gas to build in quiet isolation. Only when these forces reach the surface do their effects become visible, sometimes in the form of discolored water, floating pumice, or sudden plumes rising from the waves. On land, even familiar regions hold hidden structures below the soil. Thick forests, deserts, and remote mountain ranges conceal vents and fissures that may one day open again. Satellite images reveal only the uppermost skin of the planet. Beneath that skin lies a restless world of molten rock and shifting plates. Humanity has mapped coastlines and continents, but the deep earth remains a place only lightly understood. In that unknown space, there may be forces gathering strength in silence. The sky above carries its own set of mysteries. Each year, observatories document asteroids that drift near our orbit, some passing within distances shorter than the span of a single day's travel. Many of these objects are discovered only after they have already passed Earth. Some are small, capable only of bright streaks and brief fireballs. Others, though still undiscovered, may be large enough to reshape a region or disrupt global systems. The night sky is vast, and observational networks, though impressive, cannot yet watch every corner with equal clarity. Clouds, sunlight, and the glare of the moon obscure the view. Some asteroids approach from angles where Earth's instruments struggle to detect them, hidden in the brightness of the sun's glare until they drift close enough to be noticed. The possibility of unknown asteroids is not a cause for alarm, but a reminder that life on Earth depends on our ability to navigate a world filled with more than we can see. The dinosaurs once lived in a world that felt eternal, unaware of the rock that approached them from space. Humanity, though gifted with tools and telescopes, still sees only a fraction of the objects passing near our orbit. Each new discovery emphasizes how much remains to be found and how much remains to be watched with steady patience. Even the smallest forms of life hold mysteries beyond our full understanding. In forests, caves, soils, and the bodies of countless animals, viruses evolve quietly. Most remain harmless or confined to their native hosts. Yet occasionally, a virus discovers a new path, crossing into a species unprepared for its arrival. Unknown pathogens exist everywhere life exists, shaped by billions of years of evolution and carried by creatures we rarely notice. Some are ancient, frozen within ice or trapped in permafrost. As those frozen layers soften in warming climates, microbes once buried by time may return to environments changed far beyond their original context. The human body carries defenses shaped by long histories of exposure and adaptation, yet no immune system can anticipate organisms it has never encountered. The smallest pathogen can spread in ways that mirror the ancient pressures once faced by early humans, reaching into communities, shifting its structure, and exploring new ways to survive. While modern medicine offers tools to respond, the world changes quickly and unpredictably. As with natural disasters, time becomes a central factor. An unknown pathogen unfolding too quickly may strain the systems designed to contain it. These unseen threats, scattered across Earth and beyond, are not signs that the world is hostile. They are reminders of how incomplete our understanding remains. The planet is vast, layered, and dynamic. Humanity has explored mountains, oceans, and the structure of atoms, yet the total picture still holds shadows that science continues to fill. Some of those shadows simply hide beauty and surprise. Others hide forces capable of reshaping human life. Uncertainty becomes a quiet danger, not because it predicts catastrophe, but because it limits preparation. A known volcano can be monitored, a mapped asteroid can be tracked, a familiar disease can be studied. The unknown sits outside these lines, waiting for time or chance to reveal itself. In this way, uncertainty is part of Earth's story, woven into its geology, climate, and biology. It is neither cruel nor kind, only a reflection of the planet's complexity. Humanity lives within this complexity, drawing knowledge from each generation and building tools to understand the world more deeply. The unknown does not diminish our place within the story. It simply reminds us that the world is larger than our current view, filled with chapters still unfolding beneath the surface of oceans, within the darkness of space, and inside the quiet workings of life. In the gentle sweep of Earth's history, the threats we have discovered and the threats we have not are part of the same vast landscape. They invite awareness, curiosity, and the steady patience that has guided humanity through each age of uncertainty, from the earliest migrations to the connected world of today. Across this long journey, through the quiet dangers that shaped our species, each chapter has revealed a pattern beneath the surface. Again and again, humanity faced moments when the world tilted toward endings, when small populations tightened around shrinking waterholes, when ash dimmed the sun, when cold or heat reshaped entire landscapes, when disease gnawed through cities, or when cracks in the crust and shadows in the sky brushed close to the fragile thread of human life. And still, the story did not stop. It changed shape, narrowed for a time, then widened again as new generations found room to breathe. This pattern is not one of triumph or inevitability. It is a pattern of narrow passes where survival was often guided by quiet details that fell into place at just the right moment. A small valley with lingering water, a river that thawed while nearby plains remained frozen, a few communities shielded from volcanic ash by the wind's direction, migratory animals taking new paths that happened to cross human camps. Even the spread of diseases, brutal as they were, sometimes left isolated pockets untouched simply because mountain ridges or long distances slowed their path. Each of these moments formed part of a long chain that allowed our species to continue. Humanity was shaped by these fragile intervals. The pressures of drought carved resilience into our ancestors. Volcanic winters taught us to observe the land, store food, and find shelter. Cycling temperatures guided migrations that eventually circled the world. Long pandemics taught caution and cooperation. Through all of it, life moved with a steady rhythm, guided by instinct, chance, and the slow weave of adaptation. None of it was guaranteed. The smallest shift in climate or timing could have written a different story. Earth itself was never acting with intent. It does not favor or oppose us. Its winds move where physics directs them. Its crust bends under forces that have shaped continents for hundreds of millions of years. Oceans warm and cool in cycles older than the first mammals. The planet's surface grows forests, loses them, and grows new ones again. Ice sheets advance and retreat with quiet patience. Volcanoes swell and rest. The world turns, and its systems follow patterns set long before human eyes first looked across its plains. To live on such a planet is to accept its indifference. It is not hostile, but neither is it protective. The conditions that allow humans to thrive form only a thin layer within a much wider range of possible climates and landscapes. A few degrees of temperature, a few meters of sea level, a slight change in rainfall, or a shift in the invisible shield that guards us from the sun can shape the future more deeply than intention or desire ever could. Our atmosphere, oceans, and fertile soils are part of a delicate equilibrium, one that sits between extremes that the Earth has known many times before. Still, within this narrow window of possibility, humanity has built stories, tools, shelters, cultures, and futures. We have crossed deserts, sailed oceans, grown grains in fertile valleys, and carved paths through mountains. Every step forward has relied on a world that, for a time, offered stability. Even during disasters, there were always regions that remained livable, always pockets where life could gather itself and begin again. Those pockets sustained the line that eventually led to the present moment. In this way, our existence is both fragile and extraordinary. We are the children of countless near misses, shaped by pressures that could have ended us but instead refined our ability to adapt. Our ancestors were not chosen by fate. They survived because they happened to be in landscapes where resources still lingered, because weather patterns shifted just slowly enough for migrations to occur, because diseases did not reach every corner, and because small societies carried knowledge forward through hardship. The chain held because each link found a way to meet the next. As we look across the long stretch of time behind us, the continuity of our story feels almost like a gentle rhythm. Tension rises, landscapes change, populations thin, then slowly rebuild. Each era reveals the planet's immense power and humanity's improbable presence within it. The world rolls through cycles that would continue with or without us, yet for a brief moment, our species has found a way to exist inside that motion, to understand it, and to shape a small part of it. And so the story continues, not because it was destined to, but because those who lived before us held on through times when the path forward narrowed nearly to nothing. Their persistence carried the thread across centuries of upheaval and calm. Now it rests in our hands, woven into the present with the same quiet uncertainty that guided every chapter before. Earth will keep turning, its winds will shift, its oceans will rise and fall, its crust will slowly rearrange the continents. Through all of this, humanity remains a brief spark of awareness moving through a vast and ancient system. Our luck has carried us far, and our choices shape where the story moves next. For now, the thread holds. The world is wide, and the path continues as long as we do.